ठिक छ मैले आउँदैछ 9 बजेबाट स्टार्ट हुने हो
फोकस नहीं है
and Federalism is a not-for-profit, independent private research institution serving in the public interest with significant independence from any interest group. We endeavor to help the government create a democratic, secure, and just society by helping to make informed and transparent decisions about policies and practices. CESIF has in the past conducted research around issues surrounding cross-border relations, geopolitics, foreign policies, foreign direct investment, identity politics, military diplomacy, gender, environment, and many others. The aim of today's conference is to bring all our stakeholders together from Nepal and other South Asian countries to discuss upon the issues related to China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. The goal today is to discuss and ponder upon the critical issues regarding geopolitical implications of BRI, the strategic interests of China in South Asia, the status of BRI projects in South Asian countries, and the perceived challenge of China's debt trap diplomacy, among other relevant issues. This conference aims to come up with policy recommendations to enhance regional peace and stability. Today we have here guests from Sri Lanka, India, and Bangladesh, along other dignitaries from Nepal. The seminar today is divided into 3 panels, the first being BRI and Nepal-China Relations, where we look forward to hearing from our honorable politicians, the political and geopolitical aspects of the BRI. The second panel will go on to be Geopolitics and BRI in South Asia, where we will hear country-specific experiences from our notable panelists who have graced our seminar today, all the way from India, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. The third panel will be on Nepal-China BRI Agreement sectoral perspective, which will bring together researchers and bureaucrats who have seen the evolution of BRI in Nepal up close. In between, we will also have fruitful presentations, both from Center for Social Inclusion and Federalism and from our panelists who have joined us from other South Asian countries. Now, to provide the welcome remark, I would like to invite CESIF's Executive Chairperson, Ambassador Vijay Kantakonda.
I would like to welcome all of you this morning. Thank you very much for joining us. Excellencies, dignitaries, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, professors, friends, distinguished guests from India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh and Nepal. I welcome you all on this seminar, Geopolitics and BRI in South Asia. As Ankita told you, the aim of this conference is to bring together stakeholders from Nepal and South Asian countries to discuss upon the issues related to China's Belt and Road Initiative. The flagship program the President Xi has started in 2013. The goal today is to ponder upon the critical issues regarding the geopolitics implications of BRI, the strategic interest of China in South Asia, the status of BRI projects in South Asian countries, and the perceived challenges for China's current diplomacy among other relevant issues, including Nepal. This conference aims to come up with the policy recommendation to enhance the regional peace and security and stability. I want to begin by speaking a bit about my organization. Center for Social Inclusion and Federalism is a non-for-profit and independent private research institution serving in the public interest, significant independence from any interest group. We endeavor to help our government, political parties, create a democratic and secure just society by helping to make informed and transparent decision making in the foreign policy, security, in the national interest. CESIF has in past conducted various research including cross-border geopolitics, foreign policies, foreign direct investment, and military diplomacy, strategic social inclusion and federalism. I will now briefly speak about the changing geopolitics scenario in the region, China and BRI and its implications for Nepal and beyond. In the last decade, there has been an important shift in the geopolitical context of our region. China, which is our neighbor, immediate neighbor, has approached with aggressiveness in the conduct of its foreign affairs. China now is no longer abides by the Deng Xiaoping foreign policy doctrine, hide your strength and bide your time. That time is over for China now. Instead, President Xi Jinping has launched its own signature initiative known as the Major Country Diplomacy, which envisions China to assume great leadership role in the global politics. China is now actively seeking to extend its influence within and beyond Asia. In essence, China dreams of becoming an Asian power as well as the global power. If events of the last decades are anything to go by, it looks as if China is ready to walk miles to realize its ambition as a global superpower. Although labeled as an initiative by China, BRI is a global strategy and a strategic tool. With connectivity links and infrastructure projects spanning as many as 140 countries, China has aimed to create an alternative economic system with itself at the center. This could ultimately pose a challenge to the US-led international order. At the global level, the US-China rivalry has intensified on all fronts. However, the major flashpoint of this rivalry has been the Indo-Pacific region. The US has approached with its Indo-Pacific strategy to contain China's rise and form under its leadership alliances of like-minded countries, namely Quad and AUKUS. To rival the BRI, the US has launched similar initiatives under its leadership, such as Build Back Better World, referred as B3W, and Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. While the second half of the century was occupied with the Cold War between the US and USSR, both superpowers were in the distance from Nepal. This time it is different. China is an emerging superpower, is our immediate neighbor. Added to this, Nepal's other neighbor, India, is also an emerging global power. The regional rivalry between China and India has further complicated the geopolitical situation in the country. it is only likely that both the rivalries, Sino-US rivalry and Sino-Indian rivalry, will further intensify. This means it would be difficult for Nepal to trade a thin line of geopolitical balance. So this is a big challenge at the moment for Nepal's foreign policy. In the recent years, both US and China have increased their engagement in Nepal. Both China and US have been investing heavily on Nepal's development. However, China has shown tendencies and sometimes it's some interference on the foreign policy issues. During the MCC, it has been observed. Though its ties with the communist parties of the Nepal, China has aimed to increase influence in Nepal. The cause of concern is not that the global and regional actors are seeking to advance their own interest in Nepal. In fact, that what all states do. However, the concern is that if Nepal will be able to find the dictate geopolitical balance while still prioritizing its national interest. More often than not, Nepal's foreign policy endeavors are guided by the interest of sometimes with the political parties and sometimes of political leaders. This is one of the major challenges that Nepal needs to overcome. It's the time for Nepalese political leadership, foreign ministry and other institutions, security agencies and all, to come up a very comprehensive foreign policy at the moment to face the challenges arising in our neighborhood. Furthermore, it should be abandon parochial outlooks and should aim to prioritize national interest while enhancing cooperation with other countries. Nepal and China signed MOU of BRI on May 2017. When Nepal signed up BRI, the move was framed as an important milestone by the political leadership. The promise of the better connectivity ties and China's assistance on infrastructure development were touted as a game changer. 5 years have been passed since China engagement with Nepal intensified, but there has been a little no progress on BRI projects. Today, through this seminar, we aim to disseminate our findings of month-long research on challenges and prospects of Nepal BRI agreement. We seek to hear your feedback on the same. We have a distinguished politician with us today. In this course, we have, I acknowledge the presence of our former Foreign Minister, Mr. Pradeep Gyawali, the leader of UML. We have asked two other, our former Foreign Minister, Dr. Prakash Sharan Mahat, as my information informed that he is on the way and coming. Mr. Naran Kajishrest, yesterday evening he apologized because he is busy with some political, ongoing political negotiation. So we have a distinguished politician with us today, professors, former diplomats, who will be shedding light on the political challenges and opportunity associated with the BRI and Nepal's foreign policy. Alongside, we have professor researchers from India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, who will also be presenting their profound insights on the subject matter later in the seminar, which we will look forward to. Finally, in the final session, we shall witness the views and opinion of researchers and bureaucrats who have seen the evolution of BRI up close. We have invited some of our former trade secretaries who is going to speak on this panel. Thank you all once again for taking time from your busy schedule. We heartily welcome you and expect your active participation in the deliberation. Thank you very much.
The presentation will be on Nepal-China BRI agreement prospects and challenges. The researchers have spent the last few months at CESIF conducting this research here, talking to all the experts and all the bureaucrats and politicians and other experts related to this issue. So I would like to welcome our two presenters here.
Good morning, Excellencies and distinguished guests. My name is Pradeep and I'm associated with CESIF Nepal as a research fellow. Today, I, along with my colleague Saurav, will be presenting amongst you all our findings from the research on prospects and challenges of BRI agreement in Nepal, a study by Center for Social Inclusion and Federalism. I will be speaking upon the political context before the signing of the BRI Memorandum of Understanding, starting from 2015. Then I will move on to 2016 and 2017 when we finally signed the MOU. I will then speak about the contentious provisions in the BRI. My colleague Saurav will then shed light on other findings from our research. Post 2015 was an important year in Nepal as we promulgated the Constitution of Nepal, despite the third Madhya uprising and dissatisfaction over the fast tracking of the promulgation process. The subsequent partial border blockade in the southern border points of Nepal created a wave of nationalistic drive, which in turn motivated Nepal to diversify its trade and open connectivity links in the northern frontier. Meanwhile, the CPNUML-led government inclined towards China and signed an oil trade deal between Nepal Oil Corporation and PetroChina the same year. Next. Um, 2016, we saw an increased Chinese engagement. In March 2016, CPNUML-led government signed Transit and Transport Agreement, or the TTA. The rhetoric that TTA would ensure alternative routes to India and China could substitute India as Nepal's main trading partner gains traction. High-level political engagement between Nepal and China intensifies. The Oli administration signs a slew of other agreements to deepen ties with China. At the same time, China's proclivity to enhance its influence through party-to-party engagement increases. However, security concerns attached to Tibet and One China policy continues to dominate Nepal-China ties. Next. 2017 is very important for this research as in May 12, 2017, Nepal signed Memorandum of Understanding between the Government of Nepal and the Government of the People's Republic of China on cooperation under the Belt and Road Initiative. On March 28, 2017, the then Prime Minister Pushpakamal Dahal visits China to meet President Xi Jinping, wherein Nepal and China announced to expand cooperation under BRI and promote free trade agreement. China then goes to length to facilitate the Communist coalition for the 2017 federal and provincial polls. Subsequently, the Nepal Communist Party, or the NCP, was formed with the merger of the CPNUML and CPN Maoist Center. In October 2019, President Xi visits Nepal. It was the first Chinese president's visit in 2 decades. President Xi emphasizes on deep strategic communication, broadening practical cooperation, expanding people-to-people exchanges, and enhancing security cooperation. The joint communique issued during his visit stated that both sides had agreed to elevate everlasting friendship to strategic partnership. However, little was to be known of what the term strategic partnership cooperation actually entailed. A deepened tie between CCP and NCP was also noticed. China's influence reaches its heyday during the NCP administration, and it was also reflected in the international platform. For example, in 2020, at the UN General Assembly, Nepal defended Chinese policies in the western region of Xinjiang, where Uyghur Muslim community were subjected to atrocities by the state. In the last 15 years, the number of trainings and scholarships programs offered by China for Nepali bureaucrats have gone up by over 40 times. China shows penchant for getting involved in party politics of the NCP besides increasing its influence over state institutions. In December 2020, Chinese Vice Minister Guo Yezhou visits Nepal in an attempt to avert the split of the NCP. Chinese Ambassador to Nepal, Ho Yanqi, also steps up engagements with NCP leaders for the same, but to no avail. In March 2021, the NCP splits into 3 different parties: CPN-UML, CPN Maoist Center, and CPN Unified Socialist. and Nepali Congress-led coalition takes over Kathmandu administration. China reads this development as its influence over Kathmandu slipping away. China labels the US's MCC compact as Pandora box for Nepal and lobbies against its parliamentary ratification. In February 2022, the MCC compact is ratified by the parliament to China's dismay. China's foreign minister and state councillor Wang Yi visited Nepal in March 2022. International liaison department's head Liu Jianshao visited Nepal in July 2022, and Chinese speaker Li Jiansu in September 2022. In these three high-level visits, China attempted to improve its ties with the Nepali Congress while still pushing for the Communist coalition. However, no significant agreement was reached on the BRI implementation. I will now be speaking upon the contentious provisions specified under the BRI MOU, the first one being the Free Trade Agreement. So the Belt and Road MOU signed between Nepal and China cites that the two countries or the two sides shall conclude the joint feasibility study of Nepal-China Free Trade Agreement within 2017, and if viable will start negotiations on the Free Trade Agreement to further open up markets and expand two-way trade with a view to achieving a win-win outcome. The said feasibility study for the FTA has not been conducted yet. However, a joint committee from the Chinese side was formed which conducted an economic analysis regarding the FTA with Nepal, as confirmed by two bureaucrats who were interviewed during the course of this study. The Chinese provided an economic analysis using the Global Trade Analysis Model, or also known as GTA model, concluding that Nepal will benefit by a 4.8% increase in GDP if it moves forward with the FTA. The analysis was provided to Nepal, and upon review, the Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Supplies decided to confirm the number by conducting an economic analysis themselves. The ministry then conducted an economic analysis using the Computable General Equilibrium Model, or known as the CGE model. The results showed a decline in GDP by 0.24% if Nepal is to move forward with the FTA. The said report was then forwarded to China, suggesting to sit for a meeting to discuss over it. However, there has been no response from the Chinese counterpart as of yet. The second contentious provision under the BRI MOU is the provision of policy exchange, which according to our key informant interviews revealed that the term policy exchange was actually policy harmonization, which was altered by the Chinese upon Nepal's insistence. It is important to reflect at President Xi Jinping's article that he penned in 2019 during his visit to Nepal. He communicated a lot of things which I have mentioned earlier. However, he also mentioned particularly to have more exchanges and experience sharing on governance and development. This statement gained more momentum when 200 NCP leaders were trained on Xi Jinping thought in 2017 by a team of 50-member CCP officials. Nevertheless, the provision of policy exchange is an ambiguous one. Thus, a provision as ambiguous as such with China, which has an authoritarian model of governance, might pose challenges to Nepal's democratic practices. I will now call upon my colleague Saurav, who will present further findings of the research. Thank you.
Thank you, Prasanti. Good morning, everyone. I am Saurav Dahal, a research fellow at CESIF Nepal. Building upon Prasanti's presentation, I will first discuss geopolitical aspects of the BRI, followed by the status of BRI in Nepal, and finally about why BRI has been implemented so far. Under President Xi's leadership, China has approached with aggressive approaches in the conduct of its foreign affairs. Deng Xiaoping's 24-character dictum, "Bide your time and hide your strength," is replaced by President Xi's measured country diplomacy. President Xi's doctrine is envisioned for China to assume a greater leadership role for global affairs in accordance with China's rising power and status. China prefers to call BRI as simply an initiative which would create a win-win scenario for all participant nations. But an initiative of such a scale carries strategic implication would be stating the obvious. BRI forms an integral part of President Xi's major country diplomacy. In this light, BRI could be read as a part of China's global strategy to extend its sphere of influence, starting from its immediate neighborhood to far beyond. Next. The US's response. The meteoric rise of China in the past few decades and its hegemonic ambitions in Asia have already posed a threat to the US's status as the sole hegemon. The international system now could be read as slowly shifting towards multipolarity. The relationship between the US and China is that of great power rivalry, and the US has approached with measures to contain China's rights. This is reflected in China's Indo-Pacific strategy and in building of alliances of the likes of Quad and AUKUS. In response to the BRI, the US has launched similar initiatives, namely Build Back Better World and Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Similarly, right from the start, India too has remained firmly opposed to the BRI. China and India had a difficult relationship throughout despite having intricate economic, financial and trade ties. Like the US, India too views BRI from a geopolitical lens. The official position of India remains that India is opposed to BRI as projects are undertaken in Indian territories illegally held by Pakistan. However, there is no doubt India's opposition to the BRI stems from the fact that New Delhi views BRI as its strategic initiative. BRI could further bolster China's presence and leverage within South Asia and chip away its sphere of influence. India is also concerned about Pakistan ties with China. India's arch rival Pakistan is now in all with a friend as well as a strategic ally of China. China has been investing heavily in Pakistan under the BRI framework. China-Pakistan had jointly undertaken a massive infrastructure project named as China-Pakistan Economic Corridor to improve infrastructure within Pakistan and improve trade ties with China by modernizing Pakistan's roads, rails, air and energy transportation system. These ongoing geopolitical rivalries of US-China and China-India have made it further difficult for Nepal to trade a thin line of balance. Given the strategic implication of the BRI and the opposition of India and the US, it has become even more tricky for Nepal to implement the BRI agreement. Status of BRI after 5 years. It has already been 5 years since the signing of the MOU. However, the BRI implementation has been in limbo. For much of 2020 and the first half of 2021, BRI implementation could not make any progress as attributed to the COVID-19 pandemic. However, even as the pandemic slowed down and the world has returned to the semblance of normalcy with high-level diplomatic engagements resuming, no progress has been made so far. To date, not a single project is undertaken and nor any provisions implemented. Nepal's lack of preparation was seen right from the beginning when the MOU was signed without much deliberation over contentious provisions like free trade agreement, policy exchange, and use of Chinese currency for trade, among others. Nepal's unpreparedness was further reflected in the selection of projects. Nepal had initially proposed 35 projects, and upon China's repeated insistence, Nepal had to reduce the number to 9. Not a single ministry, apart from Ministry of Industries, Commerce and Supply, has carried out any studies pertaining to the provisions and projects under the BRI. Further, Nepal hasn't formed any institutional body dedicated to the BRI implementation. According to our key informants, Nepal lacks institutional mechanisms to undertake a bilateral project of such scale in an efficient manner. China's slowing BRI momentum. Beginning in 2018, China began reassessing its investment in foreign countries as it showed signs of a slowing economy. China was then wary of not lending frivolously anymore, like it did in Sri Lanka and Malaysia, where new governments questioned their predecessors' decision of borrowing from Beijing. In China itself, a public pullback by Chinese officials was witnessed post-criticisms regarding projects in Malaysia, Sri Lanka, and Pakistan in relation to their bloated expenses. Of late, it is reported that China has reduced its financial resources allocated for the BRI. Chinese dwindling momentum is also reflected in the 3 high-profile visits from China to Nepal in the year 2022. The BRI was not prioritized much by China in these high-profile visits, and no substantive agreement pertaining to the BRI was made. Loan component of the BRI. As a least developed country, Nepal has been enjoying soft and concessional loans. Of recent, the Nepali Congress-led government has made it clear that Nepal does not have the capacity to take commercial loans and that Nepal would only accept grants. The average interest rate of Chinese loans is 4%. And the average estimated interest rate of China's loans for BRI-related project is 4.2%. The grace period is less than 2 years and maturity length is less than 10 years. Whereas the maximum interest rate of soft loans that multilateral donors such as the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank provide has an interest of around 1.3% with a more extended repayment period. According to the Finance Ministry, the total outstanding debt as a percentage of the GDP for 2021 had crossed 40%, while it was just to 25.30% in 2015. The debt to GDP ratio of 40% is quite high for a remittance-driven economy, and any increase in this number could pose further challenges to Nepal. Further, high interest rate of the BRI and experiences of some nations like that of Sri Lanka have raised doubts if China is guided by debt trap or strategic trap diplomacy. Loans from Chinese banks, which account for around 19.6% of the total foreign debt, have further exacerbated Sri Lanka's ongoing economic crisis. The failure of the Hambantota port has been a glaring example of challenges associated with Chinese commercial loans. On December 2017, being unable to pay back loans, Sri Lanka formally handed over the strategic port of Hambantota to China on a 99-year lease. China then approached with the practice of evergreening, a practice in which lender lends more loans to its debtors to pay their prior debts. Sri Lanka had requested to restructure the debts, to which China has rejected, proposing instead to provide a $1 billion as loan. China has given 4 more loans between March 2020 to August 2021 to help keep Sri Lanka solvent. Similarly, in the past decade, Kenya's and Pakistan's overall public debts increased by 9-fold and more than double respectively, with Chinese loans growing the fastest in both the countries. In Kenya and Angola, major electoral agendas for the recent presidential polls were about Chinese loans and how to repay them. The case of Sri Lanka and other countries struggling with Chinese loans has raised fears regarding perceived debt diplomacy amongst the Nepal's political leadership. Challenges of the Kathmandu-Kerung Railway. Our KIA confirmed that China is not as eager about the Trans-Himalayan Railway due to myriad of challenges associated with the project. So we even claimed that it was reluctantly included in the joint communique of the Second International Belt and Road Forum held in April 2019 in Beijing, as Nepali leaders persistently pushed for it. The ambitious project was framed by political parties, particularly communist ones, as an economic and political game changer for Nepal. However, China is skeptical regarding the Trans-Himalayan Railway due to myriad of challenges associated with it. In late 2019, a pre-feasibility study of the railway was conducted by Chinese Railway Administration, and it concluded that it was an extremely hard project but not impossible. China recently has proposed Nepal for a feasibility study, but the financial modality of the project is challenging. Its consensus has to be reached regarding loans or grants. China is prepared to loan the fund, however, Nepal insists upon grant. Nepal signed up for the BRI in 2017, which has a culmination of Chinese push coupled with Nepal's desire to diversify its trade. Within Nepal, joining the Chinese initiative was met with welcome remarks from across the spectrum. The BRI managed to evade scrutiny for years, partly because the MOU was kept secret by both the parties for 5 long years. Once the MOU was leaked by a media house and challenges associated with the implementation of the projects and provisions started to grab headlines, the BRI narrative has shifted for the worse. The mainstream political parties, particularly the communist ones, had adopted bullish rhetoric on BRI projects earlier. In 2017 post, the Communist Coalition had made BRI projects one of its major electoral agenda. The Trans-Himalayan Railway, joining Kathmandu to Kerung and other projects under the BRI were emphasized by leaders in electoral speeches, rallies and manifestos. However, in the recent 2022 polls, political parties didn't advertise the BRI projects as much. The contentious provisions like FTA, policy exchange and use of Chinese currency for trade are now met with criticisms. China's BRI momentum itself has slowed down, and the Nepali Congress government has taken an unequivocal position that BRI can't be undertaken further with the same financing modality. Further, China's supposed debt trap diplomacy, cases of corruption and irregularities, and its project implementation model have added to the challenges. While BRI still remains a room to negotiate with China on contentious provisions and on implementation model, it is yet to be seen if China will be ready to accommodate Nepal's demands. If or not, the BRI will undergo further implementation is now contingent on China's flexibility to address Nepal's concern. Thank you. We look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Prashanti and Saurabh. Now moving on, we will start our panel discussions. The first panel we have is on BRI and Nepal-China Relations. In our panel, we have Honorable Dr. Prakash Mahat. Dr. Prakash Mahat is the current spokesperson of the Nepali Congress Party. He has served the nation in various key ministerial offices, including the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Energy, Water Resources and Irrigation. He has also served as a member of the National Planning Commission. Dr. Prakash Mahat has been part of the State Affairs Committee as well as the Special Parliamentary Hearing Committee in Nepalese Parliament. We also have Honorable Pradeep Gyawali. Mr. Pradeep Gyawali is the Central Committee member of the CPNUML party. He has served in various ministerial portfolios such as Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of Culture, Tourism and Civil Aviation. He has played a significant role in Nepal's peace process. Mr. Gyawali was part of the State Affairs and Parliamentary Proceedings Advisory Committee. To moderate the panel, today we have Ms. Thapa. Ms. Thapa has been a journalist for more than 1.5 decades. Currently, she serves as the associate editor at AP1 Television and presenting a weekly current affairs debate show titled AP Center. She is also a contributing writer for Annapurna Post. Prior to joining AP1 Television, she served as a senior assistant editor at Kathmandu Television. Ms. Thapa holds a master's degree in sociology from Tribhuvan University, Nepal. I would like to request our honorable guest and moderator to please come on stage to start the panel discussion.
Hello. Namaskar, सबैजनालाई. A very good morning. Center for Social Inclusion and Federalism ले आयोजना गरेको यो अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय कन्फरेन्समा यहाँहरु सबैजनालाई स्वागत छ. Geopolitics and BRI in South Asia नामक थीममा हाम्रो यो छलफल अगाडि बढ्नेछ. हामीसँग आज पूर्व परराष्ट्र मन्त्रीहरु हुनुहुन्छ. उहाँहरुको अनुभव BRI लाई लिएर उहाँहरूले गर्नुभएका शंका, आशंका, देख्नुभएका सम्भावना, अवसर र चुनौतीका बारेमा हाम्रो छलफल अगाडि बढ्नेछ. अलिकति कन्टेक्स्ट सेट गर्नुपर्दा नेपालमा एउटा भाष्य एकदमै बलियो बन्दै गएको छ. नेपालको परराष्ट्र नीति वा नेपालले अंगीकार गर्ने कुनै पनि परियोजनालाई लिएर एउटा बृहत छलफल चलाइदैन, पारदर्शी छलफल हुँदैन. हाम्रा दलहरूले सत्तामा हुँदा एउटा भाष्य निर्माण गर्ने, प्रतिपक्षमा हुँदा एउटा भाष्य निर्माण गर्ने र त्यसले गर्दा आम मानिसमा पनि एउटा कौतूहलता र कन्फ्युजन क्रिएट गर्छ भन्ने भाष्य बढ्दै गइरहेको छ. मलाई लाग्छ एमसीसी को सन्दर्भमा पनि हामीले त्यही नै अनुभव गर्यौं. BRI मा पनि अहिले त्यस्तै सुनिँदैछ र कुनै पनि परियोजना आफैमा त्यति ठुलो हुँदैन जसले देशलाई चमत्कारिक विकास दियोस् र त्यति सानो हुँदैन जसलाई हामी नजरअन्दाज गरेर एक्लै अगाडि बढ्न सक्छौं. परियोजनाहरूका सम्भावना, अवसर र चुनौतीलाई पहिल्याएर राष्ट्रिय हितलाई हामीले तय गर्न सकेनौं, राष्ट्रिय हितलाई केन्द्रमा राख्न सकेनौं भन्ने भाष्य नेपालमा बढ्दै गइरहेको छ. पारदर्शिता कमजोर भएपछि प्रश्नहरू जन्माउँछ, आशंकाहरू जन्माउँछ र मलाई लाग्छ प्रश्नहरूले नै हामीलाई सम्भावनातर्फ डोर्याउँछ. त्यसैले प्रश्नलाई हामीले मर्न दिनु हुँदैन र प्रश्नहरूले नै धेरै बाटोहरू पनि पहिल्याउँछ जस्तो लाग्छ. र नेपाली हितमा BRI लाई हामी कसरी प्रयोग गर्न सक्छौं, यसको सम्भावना के छ, अवसर के छ र चुनौती के छ भनेर छलफल गर्नका लागि पूर्व परराष्ट्र मन्त्री द्वय हामीसँग हुनुहुन्छ. प्रकाश शरण महत नेपाली कांग्रेसका प्रवक्ता पनि हुनुहुन्छ र पूर्व परराष्ट्र मन्त्री प्रदीप ग्यावाली ज्यू हामीसँग हुनुहुन्छ. म दुईटा विज्ञ साइडमा राखेर धेरै यो छलफललाई लामो बनाउने प्रयास गर्ने छैन. म सिधै विषयवस्तुमा प्रवेश गर्न चाहन्छु र कुनै पनि अर्डर बिना मेरो दायाँ साइडमा रहनुभएका प्रकाश शरण जीबाट म यो छलफल अगाडि बढाउन चाहन्छु. BRI को पृष्ठभूमि र नेपाल चीन सम्बन्धमा यसको अवसरलाई तपाईले कसरी हेर्नु भएको छ, पहिला कन्टेक्स्ट सेट गरौँ.
धन्यवाद समाजी. ग्यावाली जी, उपस्थित सम्पूर्ण सहभागी मित्रहरू, सर्वप्रथम त म सेन्टर फर सोशल इन्क्लुजन एन्ड फेडरलिजम CESIF जुन यो महत्त्वपूर्ण विषयमा छलफल आयोजना गर्नुभयो त्यसको लागि म धन्यवाद दिन चाहन्छु. र यो जहाँसम्म नेपाल चीन सम्बन्ध छ र यो BRI को सन्दर्भ छ, यो महत्त्वपूर्ण विषय हो. जहाँसम्म नेपाल चीन को सम्बन्ध छ, हामी दुईटा ठुला देशहरूको बीचमा छौं. दुईटै इमर्जिङ ग्लोबल पावरको रूपमा विकसित भइरहेको अवस्था छ. यो चाहिँ हाम्रो लागि अवसर पनि हो, चुनौती पनि हो र हामी चाहन्छौं कि दुवै देशसँग हामी पारस्परिक हितका आधारमा हाम्रो सम्बन्ध विकसित होस्. हरेक देशले आफ्नो स्वार्थ र आवश्यकतालाई केन्द्रबिन्दुमा राखेर विदेश नीति सञ्चालन गर्छन्. हाम्रो एउटा समस्या नेपालमा के छ भने हामी कहिलेकाहीँ आफ्नो स्वार्थ र आवश्यकता भन्दा पनि अरूले के भन्छन्, अरूले के ठान्दछन् भन्ने कुरालाई विशेष चासो चिन्ता ज्यादा दिन्छौँ। जब हामी आफ्नो स्वार्थ र आवश्यकतालाई केन्द्रबिन्दुमा राख्छौँ, सबै देशले त्यही गर्छन्। त्यसो हुनाले त्यो चाहिँ स्वाभाविक हुन्छ। त्यसकारण त्यस हिसाबले जान सक्यो भने दुईटै देशको चाहिँ जुन राइट छ त्यसबाट हामीले फाइदा लिन सक्दछौँ भन्ने मलाई लाग्छ। त्यस अर्थमा नेपाल चाइना रिलेसनसिपको कुरा गर्दाखेरि पनि यद्यपि हाम्रो चीन र नेपालको रिलेसनसिप अफन टाइम कम्पेयर्ड विथ नेपाल इन्डिया रिलेसनसिप र त्यसको मूलभूत डिफरेन्सेस चाहिँ के छ भने चीनसँगको हाम्रो जुन जियोग्राफिक हिमालयन ब्यारियर छ त्यसले गर्दा हाम्रो जुन कन्ट्याक्टको लेभल पिपुल टु पिपुल कन्ट्याक्टको लेभल लिमिटेड छ पहिलो। दोस्रो हाम्रो इन्डियासँगको जुन फ्री एउटा त खुला बोर्डर छ र यो मान्छेहरूको चाहिँ बिना भिसा बिना पासपोर्ट आवत जावत गर्ने जुन प्रावधान छ इन्गेजमेन्ट ज्यादा छ। जति ज्यादा इन्गेजमेन्ट हुन्छ त्यहाँ समस्याहरू पनि धेरै आउँछ। चीनसँग कुरा गर्दा हाम्रो चाहिँ त्यो चाहिँ जियोग्राफिक ब्यारियर र अरू भिजा ल्याङ्ग्वेज अरू प्रोभिजनले गर्दा लिमिटेड इन्टरेक्सन हुन्छ। त्यसकारण समस्याहरू पनि कम भयो जस्तो देखिन्छ स्वाभाविक रूपमा। तर हाम्रो लागि चीन नेपाल सम्बन्ध पनि त्यत्तिकै महत्त्वपूर्ण छ जति इन्डियासँगको सम्बन्ध हाम्रो लागि महत्त्वपूर्ण छ। र जुन यो पछिल्लो समयमा बेल्ट एन्ड रोड इनिसिएटिभ जुन चिनिया राष्ट्रपतिले अगाडि सार्नु भएको छ एउटा महत्त्वपूर्ण कन्सेप्ट यो ट्रेड इन्भेस्टमेन्ट कोअपरेसन बढाउने ग्लोबलाइजेसनको कन्टेक्स्टमा यसबाट चाहिँ सबै मित्र राष्ट्रहरू र अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय जगतमा जुन चीनको बढ्दो आर्थिक शक्ति छ त्यसको पनि उपयोग गर्ने जुन चाहिँ धेरै ठुलो उहाँहरूसँग यो इन्टरनेसनल अर्निङ छ रिजर्भ छ त्यसको पनि उपयोग गर्ने त्यो कन्टेक्स्टमा यो चाहिँ BRI इनिसिएटिभ आएको छ। र यो BRI वास्तवमा म नै विदेश मन्त्री हुँदाखेरि चाहिँ मेमोरेन्डम अफ अन्डरस्ट्यान्डिङ MOU साइन भएको। यद्यपि यहाँ अहिले तपाईँको पत्रमा पनि यो MOU पनि यथेष्ट तयारी नभइकन गरियो भन्ने कुरा सन्दर्भ पनि आएको छ। तर म के भन्छु भने त्यस बेला हामीले धेरै डेलिब्रेसन गरेर यो विषयमा के थियो भने तत्कालै यसलाई किन सही नगरे भन्ने आवाज पब्लिकबाट उठ्थ्यो, खास गरी मिडियाबाट। म मिडियाका साथीहरूलाई भन्ने गर्थेँ हरेकले जब इन्टरनेसनल रिलेसनको कुरा आउँछ, सम्बन्धको कुरा आउँछ, एग्रिमेन्टको कुरा आउँछ, त्यो अवस्थामा तपाईँले के सोध्नुपर्छ भने यी बिना तयारी गर्न हाम्रो फाइदाको लागि गरेका छौँ कि छैन भनेर त्यो पो तपाईँहरूले प्रश्न गर्नुभयो। त्यसमा के विषय छ, के प्रस्ताव आएको छ त्यो नै नबुझिकन किन हत्तपत्त सही गरिहाल न, किन रोकेर बस्छ। मलाई कति छ भने विदेश मन्त्रीले खल्तीमा हालेर चाहिँ बसिया छ भन्ने समेत आरोप मैले खप्नु पर्यो। मैले के भने यसमा त तपाईँहरूले सोध्नुपर्ने चाहे चीनसँगको कुनै एग्रिमेन्ट कुरा होस्, चाहे भारतसँगको होस्, अमेरिकाको होस्, कुनै पनि एग्रिमेन्ट किन नहोस्, यसमा नेपालको हितलाई केन्द्रबिन्दुमा राखेर गइरहेको छौ कि छैन त्यो प्रश्न चाहिँ तपाईँहरूले गर्नुपर्छ।
त्यो प्रश्नको चाहिँ यहाँले कसरी मनन गर्नुभयो? भिडबाट, डरबाट, दबावबाट साइन भयो वा अध्ययनबाट, विश्लेषणबाट भयो?
त्यो कुरा चाहिँ विभिन्न कोणबाट आएको, पोलिटिकल लिडरसिप विभिन्न तहबाट पनि धेरैको चासो चिन्ता किन यो चाहिँ यत्रो चाहिँ महत्त्वपूर्ण इनिसिएटिभ महत्त्वपूर्ण कुरा प्रस्तावहरू आइरहेको छ, किन के नगरिरहेको रहेछ भन्ने चासो चिन्ता भित्र र बाहिरबाट सबैतिरबाट आएको छ। मैले सबैलाई आफ्नो लिडरसिपलाई पनि प्रचण्डजी प्रधानमन्त्री हुनुहुन्थ्यो, मैले के भने हामी सबैले के हेर्छौँ भने आफ्नो देशले त्यही नै हेर्छ। चीनले पनि आफ्नै इन्ट्रेस्टमा प्रस्ताव कुनै अगाडि बढाउँछ, भारतले पनि त्यही गर्छ, अमेरिकाले सबैले त्यही गर्छ। हामीले गर्ने भने हाम्रो इन्ट्रेस्ट अनुकूलको त्यो प्रस्ताव छ कि छैन, छैन भने यो कुराहरू चाहिँ भएन, यो कुराहरू चाहिँ सुधार नभएसम्म वी कान्ट एग्री। त्यो हाम्रो राइट हो, हामीले गर्नुपर्छ, हाम्रो जिम्मेवारी पनि हो, हाम्रो कर्तव्य पनि हो। त्यही नै मैले भनेर यसलाई चाहिँ धेरै कन्सल्टेसनपछि, जस्तो त्यहाँ यो फ्री ट्रेडको बारेमा त कोही फ्री ट्रेडको बारेमा यत्तिकै त्यो फ्री ट्रेडको यति गरे उहाँहरूको प्रस्ताव के थियो भने फ्री ट्रेड चाहिँ विदाउट एनी कन्डिसन यसलाई चाहिँ अगाडि बढाउने प्रस्ताव थियो। यो चाहिँ फरेन करेन्सी के अरे चाहिँ चाइनिज करेन्सी यो हामी युज गर्ने बारेमा पनि त्यो थियो। हामीले त्यहाँ कन्डिसनल बनाए कि यो फिजिबल, इफ फिजिबल, यो फिजिबल भए मात्रै गर्ने, त्यसको लागि अध्ययन गर्ने भनेर चाहिँ हामीले चाहिँ राख्यौँ। त्यसै गरेर यो फरेन यो के अरे चाहिँ चाइनिज करेन्सीको बारेमा पनि हामीले चाहिँ जे प्रस्ताव थियो त्यहाँ धेरै कुराहरू थिए, धेरै कुरा चाहिँ चेन्जेस गरेर हाम्रो इन्ट्रेस्ट पनि यसले चाहिँ सर्भ गरिरहेछ, नेपालको इन्ट्रेस्ट पनि सर्भ गरिरहेछ भन्ने सुनिश्चित भएपछि मात्रै हामीले चाहिँ यसलाई चाहिँ सही गरेका हौँ। अब त्यसपछिको दिनमा जुन चाहिँ ओलीजीको उहाँले धेरै बताउनु होला, नेतृत्वमा सरकार आयो, हामीले त एमओयू मात्रै गरे, मेमोरेन्डम अफ अन्डरस्ट्यान्डिङ। अब त्यसलाई कार्यान्वयन गर्ने सबभन्दा महत्त्वपूर्ण पार्ट त्यो त इन प्रिन्सिपल हामीले यी विषयमा यसरी हामी कोअपरेसन यो BRI इनिसिएटिभ छ त्यसको हामी उपयोग गर्छौँ भन्ने कुरा त हामीले चाहिँ भन्यौँ, सैद्धान्तिक रूपमा हामीले सहमति गऱ्यौँ। तर व्यवहारिक रूपमा कार्यान्वयन गर्ने कुरो चाहिँ धेरै महत्त्वपूर्ण कुरा हो र त्यसमा चाहिँ यथेष्ट रिसर्च, अध्ययन, छलफल, स्टेक होल्डरसँगको पनि इन्टरेक्सनबाट त्यो अगाडि बढ्नुपर्छ र त्यसमा चाहिँ यथेष्ट तयारी भएन कि भन्ने कुरामा मेरो पनि क्वेसन छ। त्यसमा मूलतः हामीले कुनै पनि देशको सहयोग दिँदा वेदर थ्रु BRI अर सम अदर इनिसिएटिभ हामीले हेर्ने भनेको हाम्रो आवश्यकता र स्वार्थको फुलफिलमेन्ट त्यो एग्रिमेन्टबाट भएको छ कि छैन, त्यो प्रस्तावबाट भएको छ कि छैन, त्यसको यथेष्ट तयारी हामीले गर्नुपर्छ। अरूले गरिदिन्छ हाम्रो लागि भनेर हामीले एक्सपेक्ट गर्नु हुँदैन। हाम्रो हितमा त्यो छ कि छैन भन्ने कुरा हामीले नै गर्ने, हामीले नै तयारी, अरूले कसैले गर्दैन, अरूले आफ्नै इन्ट्रेस्टलाई गर्छ। त्यो स्वाभाविक पनि हो, त्यसलाई हामीले अस्वाभाविक पनि ठान्नुहुन्न। हामीले गर्ने भने हाम्रै इन्ट्रेस्टमा गर्ने हो, हाम्रै आवश्यकता अनुसार गर्ने हो। हाम्रो आवश्यकताको कुरा गरिरहँदा दुई तिनवटा कुरालाई हामीले चाहिँ मध्यनजर राख्नुपर्छ भन्ने मलाई लाग्छ। यो BRI अब धेरै अगाडि बढेको छैन, हामी सबैलाई थाहा छ। यो चाहिँ अब यो कोभिडका कारण पनि अरू धेरै कारणहरू छ, अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय अनुभवहरू पनि छ, श्रीलङ्कादेखि विभिन्न देशको अनुभवहरू, कति त्यो देशलाई फाइदा भयो भएन भन्ने कुराहरूको त्यो लेसनबाट पनि नेपालले चाहिँ लर्न गर्न सक्छ। मूलभूत रूपमा हामीले हेर्नुपर्ने कुरा के हो भने हाम्रो प्राथमिकताको क्षेत्रमा पहिलो त्यो लगानी भएको छ कि छैन, त्यसभन्दा हाम्रो बढीभन्दा बढी जनसङ्ख्यालाई त्यसले फाइदा पुर्याउँदैछ कि छैन, यो लागत र फाइदाको यथेष्ट अध्ययनका आधारमा कस्ट बेनिफिट एनालाइसिसको आधारमा फाइदा यथेष्ट छ कि छैन र त्यो के शर्तमा आउँदैछ, कस्ता खाले कन्डिसनहरू छन् भन्ने कुरा चाहिँ त्यो प्रोजेक्ट स्पेसिफिक हुन्छ। हरेक प्रोजेक्ट हामी पहिला त प्रोजेक्ट सेलेक्सन चाहिँ उपयुक्त हुनु पर्यो, त्यो प्राविधिक रूपमा चाहिँ उपयुक्त हुनु पर्यो, फाइनेन्सियली चाहिँ उपयुक्त हुनु पर्यो, होइन? त्यसपछि इकोनोमिक रिटर्न कति समयमा कसरी हुन्छ त्यो चाहिँ सुनिश्चित हुनु पर्यो। त्यो इन्भाइरोमेन्टल इम्प्याक्ट अरू चाहिँ प्राविधिक पक्ष त्यसलाई हामीले चाहिँ राम्रोसित हेर्नु पर्यो र कुन शर्तमा त्यो आउँदैछ, त्यसको चाहिँ जुन ऋणमा आउँदैछ, ग्रान्टमा आउँदैछ, ऋणमा आउँदैछ भने कुन कुन कन्डिसन छ, कति त्यसको ब्याज दर छ र त्यसको चाहिँ रिटर्न पिरियड के छ, त्यसको चाहिँ के छ भनेदेखि उनीहरूको चाहिँ सामग्रीहरूको प्रयोगको चाहिँ कुराहरू के छ, ठेकदार चाहिँ के छ इन्टरनेसनल कम्पिटिसनबाट हुन्छ हुँदैन, कुन शर्तमा त्यो गरिन्छ, यी सम्पूर्ण कुराहरू चाहिँ हामीले चाहिँ हेर्नुपर्ने हुन्छ र अहिलेसम्मको चाहिँ जुन हामीले चाहिँ लोन लिइरहेका छौँ त्यसको अनुभव चाहिँ त्यति चाहिँ राम्रो छैन।
हस्, म तपाईँसँग आउँछु यो शर्तहरूका विषयमा। म प्रदीप गेवाली ज्यूसँग जान्न चाहे। जस्तो मे 22, 2017 हामीले MOU साइन गरिसक्यौँ। प्रकाश सर महतजीले नै भन्नुभएको शब्दलाई सापट्टि लिएर कुनै पनि परियोजना आयोजनालाई साइन गर्नु पूर्व एउटा बृहत छलफल हुनुपर्थ्यो। त्यो परियोजना राष्ट्रिय हितमा छ कि छैन भनेर हामीले मध्यनजर गर्नुपर्छ। त्यो परियोजना बनिसकेपछि आर्थिक लाभ हामीले के पाउने, वातावरणीय विनाशका दृष्टिकोणबाट त्यो परियोजना कति भाएबल छ भन्ने खालका यावत अध्ययनहरू आवश्यक छ, अनि मात्रै त्यो परियोजना हाम्रो हितमा छ या छैन भनेर हामी अगाडि बढ्न सक्छौँ भन्ने उहाँको भनाइमा तपाईँ कसरी हेर्नुहुन्छ? हामीले के ती कामहरू गऱ्यौँ वा हामी कहाँ त फेरि यो भिडले निर्देशन दिने र त्यो भिडकै निर्देशन मान्ने परम्परा पनि पछिल्लो समय बढ्दै गइरहेको छ। पपुलिस्ट हुने होड हाम्रो नेतृत्वमा पनि निकै हावी भएको छ। कुनै पनि परियोजनालाई हामीले ब्ल्याक एन्ड व्हाइटमा मात्रै हेर्छौँ, बिचको सम्भावना, अवसर र चुनौतीलाई चाहिँ हामीले डिमिनिस गरिदिन्छौँ। यो परियोजना आयो भने राम राज्य आउँछ भन्ने एउटा तर्क, अर्को यो परियोजना आयो भने विदेशी सेना आएर हाम्रै भूमिमा बुट बजार्छन् भन्ने तर्क। त्यो बिचको सत्य, सम्भावना र अवसरलाई हामीले कतै घिजुलिएका छौँ कि भन्ने तपाईँलाई कति लाग्छ र अध्ययन कति भयो? हाम्रा संयन्त्रहरूलाई हामीले कति बलियो बनायो यी परियोजना हाम्रो हितमा छ कि छैन भनेर निर्खेल गर्नका लागि?
धन्यवाद समाजी, डाक्टर महत, प्रबुद्ध व्यक्तित्वहरू, विदेशी पाहुनाहरू र सबै उपस्थित सञ्चारकर्मी साथीहरू लगायत सबै सहभागी महानुभावहरू, म सुरुमै सेन्टर फर सोसल इन्क्लुजन एन्ड फेडरलिजमलाई धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद दिन चाहन्छु। एउटा टाइमली रिलेभेन्ट र महत्त्वपूर्ण विषयमा यो छलफल आयोजना गरेर मलाई पनि केही कुराहरू राख्ने मौका दिनुभएकोमा समाजले उठाउनुभएका विषयहरूलाई जोड्दै 4-5वटा सन्दर्भ यहाँ उल्लेख गर्न चाहँला। पहिलो कुरा, चीनले अगाडि सारेको बेल्ट एन्ड रोड इनिसिएटिभ्स BRI-लाई हामीले एउटा ग्लोबल पर्सपेक्टिभमा र एउटा हाम्रो आफ्नो देशको पर्सपेक्टिभमा हेर्नुपर्छ जस्तो मलाई लाग्छ। ग्लोबली यो विषय अगाडि सारिरहँदा सम्भवतः चीन त्यसको धेरै इलाबोरेट गरेको मैले पाएको छैन, तर पछिल्लो लिटरेचरहरूमा उनीहरूले चाहिँ खास गरेर अहिलेको एक्जिस्टिङ जुन मोडल छ ग्लोबलाइजेसनको, त्यो ग्लोबलाइजेसनको वर्तमान मोडलले खास गरेर विकासशील देशहरू या अल्प विकसित देशहरू या अरू कतिपय पछाडि परेका देशहरूले त्यसको बेनिफिट चाहिँ प्रोपरली लिन सकेनन् या त्यसको बेनिफिट चाहिँ इक्विटेबल ढङ्गले चाहिँ सेयरिङ भएन। त्यसबाट कहीँ न कहीँ ग्लोबलाइजेसनको नयाँ खालको भाष्य, त्यसको एउटा नयाँ खालको मोडल जरुरी छ, जहाँ चाहिँ विकासशील देशहरूले प्रोजेक्ट छनौटहरूमा एउटा आफ्नो स्वनिर्णयको अधिकार प्रयोग गर्न पाउन्, उनीहरूलाई पनि इन्क्लुजन गरियोस्, विकासको त्यो यात्रामा उनीहरूको पनि सहभागिता होस् र सेयर्ड बेनिफिट लिन सकियोस्। यो खालको मोडल चाहिन्छ भन्ने चाहिँ अवधारणा पछिल्लो समय BRI-को व्याख्या गर्दा चाहिँ नेताहरूले त्यसो गरेको देखिन्छ। यदि त्यो हो भने स्वाभाविक रूपले त्यसलाई सकारात्मक रूपमा लिनुपर्छ। ग्लोबलाइजेसनको वर्तमान जुन ढाँचा छ त्यो ढाँचाबाट चाहिँ सबै देशहरूले समान रूपमा लाभ उठाउन नसकेको चाहिँ सत्य हो। त्यसबाट कहीँ न कहीँ त्यसमा सुधारको जरुरी छ। त्यसको खाँचो यदि कहीँ कतै यस्ता इनिसिएटिभहरूले अगाडि दिन सक्छन् भनेदेखि त्यसलाई सकारात्मक लिनुपर्छ। एउटा यो कन्टेक्स्टमा हेर्नुपर्ला। दोस्रो चाहिँ नेपाल जस्तो देशका लागि यस्ता प्रोजेक्टहरूमा BRI-को लाई एउटा उदाहरण बनाएर तर यस्ता अरू पनि इनिसिएटिभ्सहरू आउँछन् भने पहिलो कुरा, अहिलेको ग्लोबलाइज दुनियाँमा कुनै पनि देशले यदि आफूलाई त्यो विश्व अर्थतन्त्रको डाइनामिजमसँग, त्यसको एउटा भावसँग आफूलाई जोड्न सकेन भने आइसोलेसनमा उसले विकास गर्न सक्ने स्थिति हुँदैन। स्वाभाविक रूपले त्यसरी जोडिँदा
चुनौतीहरू आउँछन्। त्यो चुनौतीहरूलाई चाहिँ कसरी सामना गर्ने सम्बन्धी देशको नीति निर्माताहरूको क्षमतामाथि भर पर्ने कुरा हो। तर विश्व अर्थतन्त्रसँग जोडिएर नै कुनै पनि देशले आफूलाई अगाडि बढाउन सक्छ। त्यस अर्थमा चाहिँ BRI-ले हामीलाई एउटा नयाँ पर्सपेक्ट दिन्छ कि विश्वको दोस्रो ठुलो अर्थतन्त्र र त्यस थ्रु चाहिँ विश्वको यो गतिशील अर्थतन्त्रसँग कहीँ न कहीँ जोड्ने हिसाबले यसलाई हामीले हेर्नुपर्छ भन्ने मलाई लाग्छ। तेस्रो, नेपाल एउटा ल्यान्डलक देश। एउटा अध्ययनले बताउँछ कि ल्यान्डलक हुनुको नाताले हामीले हाम्रो ट्रेडमा, खास गरी इन्टरनेसनल ट्रेडमा र हाम्रा अरू सप्लाई चेनमा चाहिँ कम्तीमा 20% एडिसनल मूल्य चाहिँ चुकाइरहेका छौँ। हामीलाई त्यही चिज बङ्गलादेशले या श्रीलङ्काले या कोस्टल कन्ट्रीहरूले चाहिँ उत्पादन गर्दा उनीहरूलाई 20% सस्तो पर्छ भनेदेखि हामीले त्यही चिज उत्पादन गरेर ग्लोबल मार्केटमा जोडियो भनेदेखि चाहिँ हामीलाई 20% महँगो पर्छ, अर्थात् हाम्रो कम्पिटिटिभनेस चाहिँ त्यसले कमजोर बनाउँछ। त्यसो हुनाले नेपाल जस्तो देशका लागि, ल्यान्डलक देशहरूका लागि कनेक्टिभिटी मस्ट। तपाईँले डाइभर्स खालका कनेक्टिभिटीहरूसँग आफूलाई जोड्नु भएन, आफ्नो अर्थतन्त्रलाई जोड्नु भएन भनेदेखि चाहिँ आइसोलेसनमा विकास गर्न सकिँदैन। यी सन्दर्भहरूलाई समेत ध्यानमा राख्दै र छिमेकी देश चाहिँ जसले पछिल्लो केही डेकेडमा चाहिँ एउटा एकदमै मिराकुलस विकास गरिरहेको छ, त्यससँग जोड्ने अर्थमा चाहिँ BRI-लाई नेपालले ग्रहण गरेको हो भन्ने मलाई लाग्छ। अब यहाँले राख्नुभएका जिज्ञासाहरूमाथि आउँदाखेरि म एउटा कुरा के अनुरोध गर्न चाहन्छु भनेदेखि यसबारेमा पर्याप्त बहस छलफल भएको हो। बहस र त्यसले एक खालको चाहिँ साझा अवधारणा पनि, जस्तो उदाहरणको निम्ति त्यति बेला यो MOU सही गर्दा नेपाली काङ्ग्रेस र माओवादी केन्द्रको सहितको संयुक्त सरकार थियो। हामी अपोजिसनमा थियौँ, तर त्यसमा हाम्रो सहमति थियो। पछि हामी सरकारमा गयौँ, नेपाली काङ्ग्रेस अपोजिसनमा थियो। त्यस पछाडि बढेका धेरै कुराहरूमा पनि छलफल गरेर अगाडि बढिएको छ। पहिलो कुरा, यो विषयमा चाहिँ एक किसिमको नेसनल युनानिमिटी छ, एक खालको कन्सेन्सस छ भन्ने मलाई लाग्छ। त्यसो भएर अघि एउटा प्रस्तुतिमा चाहिँ के देखिएको थियो भने त्यो क्रोनोलोजी हेर्दा यो BRI भनेर चाहिँ खालि कम्युनिस्टहरूले मात्रै गरे अगाडि बढाए हो कि भने जस्तो अलिकति पोलिटिकल कनोटेसन दिन खोज्नु भएको थियो। मलाई त्यसमा अलिकति मेरो थोरै विमति छ। होला आयोजकहरूका, रिसर्चरहरूका आफ्ना पोलिटिकल फेसहरू हुन सक्ने भए उहाँहरूको आफ्नो कुराहरू होला, तर तथ्यलाई तथ्यकै रूपमा राख्नु राम्रो हुन्छ जस्तो मलाई लाग्छ। यो एउटा यस्तो विषय हो जसमा विमति चाहिँ थिएन। अब त्यस पछाडि हामी अहिले कहाँ छौँ अथवा कति अगाडि बढ्यो, त्यसमा यसलाई यहाँले भन्नुभएको जस्तो सट्टामा हो
राख्न चाहे। पोलिटिकल कन्सेन्सस थियो, विमति थिएन, साझा अवधारणाले हामीले त्यो परियोजनालाई हेऱ्यौँ भनेर भनिरहँदा 17मा MOU साइन हुन्छ, आजसम्म एउटा पनि काम अगाडि बढ्न सकिरहेको छैन। के गरिरहेका छौँ हामी? अध्ययन गरिरहेका छौँ, अनुसन्धान गरिरहेका छौँ, वा समय घर्किनका लागि कुरिरहेछौँ? के गरिरहेछौँ हामीले?
यसमा दुईवटा कुरा छ। मैले आफूले जानेसम्मका कुराहरू यहाँलाई सेयर गरौँला। 2017मा यो यसमा सही भयो, तर एक खालको सङ्क्रमण नै थियौँ हामीहरू। चुनावको पूर्व सन्ध्यामा, यो सम्भवतः अगस्त महिना मेमा चाहिँ हस्ताक्षर भयो। नयाँ संविधान अन्तर्गतको पहिलो चुनावको तयारी चल्दै थियो, धेरै अगाडि बढ्ने कुरा थिएन। नयाँ सरकार बन्यो 2018को फेब्रुअरीमा। त्यस पछाडि चाहिँ कामहरू क्रमशः अगाडि बढ्दै गएर अहिले दुईवटा सबैभन्दा महत्त्वपूर्ण कुरा। एउटा 2019को अप्रिलमा भएको दोस्रो अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय BRI सम्मेलनमा नेपालले प्रस्तुत गरेको ट्रान्स हिमालयन मल्टी डाइमेन्सनल कनेक्टिभिटी नेटवर्क, जुन नेपालको हकमा BRI-को फ्रेम हो, त्यो चाहिँ अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय सूचीमा सूचीकृत भएको छ। अर्थात् त्यसले अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय रिकग्निसन प्राप्त गरेको छ। दोस्रो चाहिँ त्यस अन्तर्गत सुरुमा धेरै खालको विश लिस्ट जस्तो भयो, तर पछि त्यसलाई ट्रेनिङ गर्दै गर्दै आएर 9वटा परियोजनाहरू चाहिँ छनौट भएका छन्। र त्यस कुरालाई थप इन्डोर्स चाहिँ 2019को अक्टोबरमा सी जिनपिङ नेपाल भ्रमणमा आउनु हुँदाखेरि त्यसलाई थप एउटा इम्प्यासिस दिइयो। तर दुर्भाग्य नै भन्नुपर्छ, 2020को सुरुदेखि विश्व कोभिड महामारीमा गयो र अहिले पनि हामी त्यसका कुनै न कुनै सकबाट अझै बाहिर निस्किन सकिरहेका छैनौँ। त्यस भएर इम्प्लिमेन्टेसनको पाटोमा समस्या अथवा ढिलाइ भएको कुरा सत्य हो। तर यो विषय सब चाहिँ एक खालको साझा सोचको विषय हो। नेपालका सबै राजनीतिक दलहरूमा नेपालले दुईटा छिमेकीहरूको विकाससँग आफूलाई जोडेर र दुवैबाट लाभ लिएर मात्रै अगाडि बढ्न सक्छ र त्यसको निम्ति BRI जस्ता चाहिँ फ्रेमवर्कहरू हाम्रा लागि चाहिँ इन्स्ट्रुमेन्टल हुन सक्छन्। हाम्रो ल्यान्ड अफ नेसले उत्पन्न गरेका यसका कन्स्टेन्टहरूलाई अन्त्य गर्नका लागि, हाम्रो अर्थतन्त्रलाई चलायमान बनाउनका लागि, या अघि अर्को कुरा पनि छ, अध्यक्षहरूले अलि बढी डेट ट्र्यापको कुरा गर्नुभयो। त्यसभित्र टेक्नोलोजी ट्रान्सफरका कुराहरू होलान्, त्यसमा पिपुल टु पिपुल कन्सर्नका कुराहरू मतलब कनेक्सनका कुराहरू होलान्। यी धेरै कुराहरू छन्, त्यसलाई एकदमै अलिक बाइस जस्तो देखिन्छ खालि डेट ट्र्यापको कुरा गरिरहँदा, जबकि नेपालले BRI अन्तर्गत त एक कौडी पनि डेट नै लिएको छैन। कहाँबाट डेट ट्र्यापको कुरा आयो? हाइपोथेटिकल कुराहरूमा जानु उचित हुन्छ जस्तो मलाई लाग्दैन। त्यसो भएर त्यसबाट लाभ लिने कुराहरूमा चाहिँ अब हाम्रो फोकस हुन जरुरी छ।
हस्, धन्यवाद। म तपाईँ समक्ष आउँछु। म प्रकाश र महतज्यूलाई अर्को प्रश्न राख्न चाहेँ। उहाँले डेट ट्र्यापको कुरा गर्नुभएको छ। आयोजना अगाडि बढेको छैन, पैसाको मोडल पनि तय भइसकेको छैन। अहिले यो आयोजना हामीलाई चाहिन्छ भनेर हामीले छलफल गरिरहँदा नै यसको दुईटा क्लज, एउटा लेम्यानका रूपमा मैले लेखेको चाहिँ 4% लोन भनिएको छ है, 4% लोन, जबकि नेपालले अहिलेसम्म मेरो विचारमा 1% कै हाराहारीमा काम गरिरहेको छ। इन एन एभरेज त 2 भन्दा तल नै छ। यो 4% इन्ट्रेस्ट नेपाल सरकारले के भनिरहेको छ, हामी त ग्रान्टमा काम गर्छौँ, हामीलाई त ग्रान्ट चाहिन्छ, लोनमा हामी अगाडि बढ्न सक्दैनौँ भनेर प्रधानमन्त्रीले नै अस्ति भर्खरै मात्र भन्नुभएको हो, शेरबहादुर देउवाजीले है। यो कसरी अगाडि बढ्छ भनेपछि यो दुईटा बुदामै, दुईटा फ्रेमवर्कमै हामी स्पष्ट छैनौँ कि ग्रान्ट हो कि लोन हो भन्ने कुरा नै स्पष्ट छैन। अर्को फ्री ट्रेड एग्रिमेन्ट, नेपाल जस्तो मुलुक जसको अर्थतन्त्र नै आयातित वस्तुहरूबाट आउने रेभेन्यूबाट चलिरहेको छ, उसले चीन जस्तो शक्तिशाली मुलुकसँग FTA गर्न सक्छ त? यो मुख्य प्रश्न हुन आउँछ होला। चीनबाट 100 रुपियाँको सामान ल्याउँदा हामीले 30 पैसाको पनि सामान पठाउँदैनौँ भन्ने आँकडा छ। हामी FTA को कुरा गरिरहेका छौँ, चीनले फिजिबिलिटी अध्ययन गर्नुपर्छ FTA मा भनेर भनिरहेको छ। दुईटा फन्डामेन्टल बुदामै हामी स्पष्ट हुन नसकिरहेको अवस्थामा यो BRI लाई हामीले कसरी अगाडि बढाउनु पर्छ होला?
धन्यवाद समाजी। पहिलो कुरा म के भन्न चाहन्छु भने हामीले यो MOU साइन गर्ने बेलामै उहाँहरूको जोड यो फ्री ट्रेड एग्रिमेन्टमा थियो। हामीले भन्यौँ यसको फिजिबिलिटी स्टडी नगरिकन, यसबाट नेपाललाई फाइदा हुन्छ हुँदैन भन्ने नहेरिकन हामी स्वीकार गर्न सक्दैनौँ भनेपछि यो फिजिबिलिटी स्टडी गरेपछि मात्रै भनेर त्यो त्यसमा चाहिँ इन्क्लुड गरिहाल्छ। र हामीले भन्यौँ पनि, किनभने हामीसँग एक्सपोर्टेबल आइटमहरू चाहिँ एकदमै कम छ र यो त वान वे ट्राफिक जस्तै हुन्छ। जबसम्म यहाँ चाहिँ सिग्निफिकेन्ट जुन चाहिँ इन्भेस्टमेन्ट पार्ट पनि छ BRI को, धेरै ठुलो इन्भेस्टमेन्ट चीनबाट यहाँ भएर उद्योग व्यवसायमा लगानी भएर अनि त्यो फेरि चाहिँ चीनमा चाहिँ एक्सपोर्ट, त्यो चाहिँ उत्पादित सामग्री चीनमा एक्सपोर्ट गर्न सक्ने स्थितिमा यो कुराहरू चाहिँ हामी चाहिँ गर्न सक्छौँ। त्यस कारण चाहिँ पहिला त इन्भेस्टमेन्ट नै हामी चाहिँ एक्सपोर्टेबल आइटममै व्यापक रूपमा चाहिँ वृद्धि हुनु पर्यो। त्यो अवस्थामा मात्रै यी कुराहरू चाहिँ सम्भव छ। त्यस कारण यसको चाहिँ फिजिबिलिटी चाहिँ हामीले हेर्नुपर्छ भनेर भनेका छौँ। मलाई लाग्छ अहिलेको अवस्थामा फ्री ट्रेड एग्रिमेन्ट गर्ने चाहिँ फिजिबल छैन। त्यो चाहिँ अध्ययनले पनि देखिरहेको छ, किनभने केही इन्भेस्टमेन्ट आएको छैन। अब अहिलेसम्म न हाम्रो कुनै यो उहाँले भने जस्तै एग्रिमेन्ट त गऱ्यौँ, कुनै चाहिँ न लगानी आएको छ, न उद्योग व्यवसायहरू चाहिँ यहाँ चाहिँ अगाडि बढेको छ। त्यो नभएको अवस्थामा त्यो चाहिँ अहिले चाहिँ सम्भावना छ। फ्युचर जब त्यो परिस्थिति आउँछ, त्यो परिस्थिति आयो भने हुने कुरा हो। तत्काललाई चाहिँ त्यो चाहिँ सम्भव छैन फ्री ट्रेड एग्रिमेन्टको कुरा। दोस्रो कुरा जुन तपाईँले भन्नुभयो, यो शर्तमा हामीले चाहिँ यो सहयोग स्वीकार गर्ने हुने सन्दर्भ छ। अवश्य पनि हाम्रो चाहिँ ऋणको भार बढिरहेको छ। 1990 अगाडि जुन चाहिँ ऋणको भारले नेपाल थिचिसकेको थियो, 1990 पछि नेपाली काङ्ग्रेसले जुन चाहिँ पोलिसी इम्प्लिमेन्ट गर्यो, त्यो चाहिँ हाम्रो चाहिँ ऋणलाई प्रतिशतलाई हामीले कम गर्यौँ। फेरि अहिले पछिल्लो समयमा चाहिँ स्वाटै चाहिँ ऋणको प्रतिशत बढेको अवस्थामा हामीले चाहिँ आँखा चिम्लेर सहयोग आयो भन्दैमा उनी चाहिँ ऋण के अरे ऋण काटेर घिउ खाने भने जस्तो त्यो पनि घिउ हो कि होइन थाहा नभइकन त्यो
लोन र ग्रान्टमै नि 4% हामीले ग्रान्ट माग्दा यसमा सहमति भएन भने के यो आयोजना
त्यही त मैले के भन्दैछु भने हामी सकेसम्म ग्रान्टलाई हामी प्राथमिकता दिन्छौँ। यद्यपि 100% सबै ग्रान्टबाट मात्रै हामीले स्वीकार्छौँ, अरू चाहिँ ऋणै स्वीकार्दैनौँ भन्ने कुरो चाहिँ होइन। तर ऋण दिनुपर्ने अत्याधिक प्राथमिकताको क्षेत्रमा पनि ऋणै दिनु पर्यो भने पनि जुन इन्टरनेसनल मल्टिल्याटरल एजेन्सीहरूले हामीलाई जुन जसरी चाहिँ ऋण दिन्छन्, जस्तो चाहिँ एडिबी वर्ल्ड ब्याङ्कको चाहिँ सफ्ट आर्म जुन छ, जसरी यो चाहिँ के छ भने यो नोमिनल इन्ट्रेस्ट रेटमा चाहिँ लोन दिन्छन्। पहिलो त प्राथमिकताको क्षेत्र हुनु पऱ्यो। हाम्रो चाहिँ कस्ट बेनिफिट एनालाइसिसमा आर्थिक अध्ययनमा त्यो भाइबल देखिनु पऱ्यो। इकोनोमिक रिटर्न एउटा सर्टेन टाइम फ्रेमभित्र इकोनोमिक रिटर्न आउने हुनु पऱ्यो। त्यो निर्क्योल गरिसकेपछि मात्रै त्यसमा हामी चाहिँ ऋणको रूपमा कति स्वीकार गर्ने र कुन शर्तमा स्वीकार गर्ने कुरा चाहिँ हामीले चाहिँ टुङ्ग्याउनु पर्छ। र हामी चाहिँ मल्टिल्याटरल एजेन्सीले जुन सफ्ट लोन दिन्छन् त्योभन्दा ज्यादा ब्याज दरमा हामी चाहिँ कुनैसँग पनि यो BRI अन्तर्गत मात्रै होइन, न चीन भारतसँग न अमेरिकासँग न कसैसँग हामी चाहिँ ऋण लिन हामी एफोर्ड गर्न सक्दैनौँ। त्यसकारण चाहिँ सफ्ट लोन त्यो पनि अत्यावश्यकीय क्षेत्रमा मस्ट त्यो के छ भने प्रायोरिटीको क्षेत्रमा मात्रै हामी ऋण स्वीकार गर्न सक्छौँ। यो कुन कन्टेक्स्टमा पनि आएको छ भने उहाँहरू सरकार आएपछि एकपटक चाहिँ यो अति ज्यादा यसमा चाहिँ उत्साह यो रेल ल्याइहाल्ने जोडिहाल्ने भन्ने कुराहरू चाहिँ आयो। पहिलो कुरा त्यसको फिजिबिलिटी स्टडी भएको छैन, प्रायोरिटी त्यसको चाहिँ इकोनोमिक स्टडी भएको छैन। र हाम्रो अध्ययनमा के छ भने जबसम्म इन्डिया र चीनको ट्रेड त्यो जुन प्रपोज रेलबाट हुँदैन त्यो बेलासम्म त्यो चाहिँ के छ भने रेलवे फिजिबल इकोनोमिकली फिजिबल हुँदैन। त्यो चाहिँ टेक्निकली फिजिबल हुन्छ हुँदैन त्यो त अध्ययनकै विषय छ। इकोनोमिक टेक्निकल फिजिबल भयो भने पनि इकोनोमिक फिजिबल हाम्रो र चीनको मात्रै व्यापार, हाम्रो हार्डली एनिथिङ एक्सपोर्ट गर्ने। अब त्यो अवस्थामा रेल प्रोजेक्ट गुल्नावती भयो। जब इन्डिया चाइना दुवैले एग्री गर्छ कि अब नेपाल थ्रु चाहिँ रेलवे लाइन बनाउने र हामी यसबाट चाहिँ ट्रेड गर्ने, बरु हामी त्यस बेला हामी के भन्नुला भने हाम्रो भूमि युज गरेको आपत हामीलाई चाहिँ केही फी त तिनीहरूले दिनुपर्छ नि भनेर भन्नुला। त्यसमा हाम्रो चाहिँ स्पष्ट दृष्टिकोण नेपाली काङ्ग्रेस के हो भने यो रेल प्रोजेक्टको विषयमा हामीले चाहिँ जस्तो चाहिँ मोदीजीले भन्नुभयो रक्सौलबाट काठमाडौँ जोड्छ, उहाँले पनि ग्रान्टमा गर्नुपर्छ। चीनबाट चाहिँ के छ भने रसुवा नाकाबाट काठमाडौँ जोड्ने पनि ग्रान्टमा गर्नुपर्छ। किन गर्नुपर्छ भने यदि यो दुवै देशले काठमाडौँमा रेलवे लाइन जोड्यो भने र दुवैले ट्रेड गरे भने यसबाट ट्रेड गऱ्यो भने सबभन्दा ज्यादा बेनिफिट दुवै देशले पाउने हो, नेपालले भन्दा पनि ज्यादा। हाम्रो चाहिँ हामीले पाउने बेनिफिट चाहिँ सेकेन्डरी हो, बरु हामीले चाहिँ तपाईँहरूले बेनिफिट दिनुभयो हामी हाम्रो थ्रु चाहिँ रेलवे लाइन युज गरेर भनेपछि त्यस बापत हामीलाई केही फी दिनुहोस् भन्ने हो। त्यस कारण ऋण लिएर चाहिँ यो रेलवे प्रोजेक्ट इज नट फिजिबल, भेरी क्लियर है। र अरू प्रोजेक्टमा पनि हामीले त्यसको चाहिँ लागत अध्ययन गरेर र सफ्ट लोन भए मात्रै लिमिटेड एमाउन्टमा हामी चाहिँ ऋण स्वीकार गर्न सक्छौँ। र अब हामीले कुनै पनि ऋण प्रोजेक्टमा यो त्यही देशको सामग्री आउने, त्यही देशको ठेकेदार आउने, यो कसैसँग पनि अब हामीले स्वीकार गर्नुहुन्न भन्ने मेरो चाहिँ व्यक्तिगत राय छ। इन्टरनेसनल अहिले चाहिँ जस्तो चाहिँ हामीले चाहिँ MCC अन्तर्गत पनि के छ इन्टरनेसनल प्रतिस्पर्धाबाट उनीहरूको त के हो भने त्यसमा त यहाँ क्वेसन उठिरहेको छ। इन्टरनेसनल प्रतिस्पर्धाबाट त्यो पनि ग्रान्टमा, त्यो लोन पनि होइन, ऋण होइन, ग्रान्टमा सबै के छ भने इन्टरनेसनल प्रतिस्पर्धाबाट ठेक्का लाउने कुरा आइसकेपछि अब ऋणमा पनि उनीहरूकै देशको सामग्री अनिवार्य आउनुपर्ने, अनि कमर्सियल रेटको इन्ट्रेस्ट तिर्नुपर्ने, अनि उनीहरूकै ठेकेदार आउने, उनीहरूले नै अध्ययन गर्ने, उनीहरूले नै ठेकेदार लगाउने भएपछि त द्याट इज नट गोइङ टु वर्क फर द बेनिफिट अफ नेपाल। यस कुरामा हामी चाहे BRI प्रोजेक्ट होस् चाहे अरू देशसँग लिने ऋणको कुरा हो, सफ्ट लोन हामी स्वीकार गर्ने लिनै पर्ने प्रोजेक्टमा। दोस्रो चाहिँ इन्टरनेसनल कम्पिटिसनमा अब हामी चाहिँ ठेक्का लाउने कुरामा र चाहिँ यो चाहिँ सोर्सिङको विषयमा पनि हामीले चाहिँ त्यो त्यही देशकै अनिवार्य युज हुनुपर्ने भन्ने कुरालाई चाहिँ हामीले चाहिँ नकार्नुपर्छ भन्ने मलाई लाग्यो।
म तपाईँसँग यो FTA र लोन कि ग्रान्ट भन्ने विषयमा मैले प्रदीप गेवालीज्यूको पनि धारणा बुझ्न चाहेँ, किन भन्दा हाम्रो व्यापार घाटा अहिले डरलाग्दो छ। भारतसँगको व्यापार घाटा मात्रै हामी सतहमा कुरा गरिरहेका हुन्छौँ। हाम्रो अर्थतन्त्र नै हामीले आयात गरेका वस्तुहरूबाट आउने रेभेन्यूबाट चलिरहेको अवस्था छ। त्यो कति डरलाग्दो हो भनेर हामीले मिहिन रूपमा त्यो सायद अनुभव पनि गरेका छैनौँ होला। अब त्यसरी नै चलिरहेको छ तदर्थवादमा, हामी त्यसैमा रमाइरहेछौँ। अब फेरि मेरो एउटा मात्रै कन्सर्न प्रदीप गेवालीज्यूसँग, अघि हामीले त्यो फ्री ट्रेड एग्रिमेन्टको कुरा गऱ्यौँ र प्रकाश शरणज्यूले भन्नुभयो कि सफ्ट लोन मात्रै 4% त धेरै नै भयो, अथवा हामी ग्रान्टमा मात्रै सहमति जनाउन सक्छौँ भन्ने उहाँको आशय थियो। अब हामी चाहिँ बहस गर्दाखेरि सम्भावना र अवसर भन्दा पनि अलिकति बढी उत्साही हुन्छ। जस्तो BRI-कै कुरा लिएर अगाडि बढ्दा नै हामी चाहिँ यो केरुङबाट काठमाडौँसम्म रेल आउने अनि काठमाडौँबाट लुम्बिनीसम्म रेल जाने भन्ने कुराहरू गऱ्यौँ होइन। तर अहिलेको धरातले यथार्थ के छ भन्दा म अस्ति भर्खर मात्रै एउटा समाचार पढिरहेको थिएँ कि तातो पानी नाका पूर्ण रूपमा सञ्चालन गर्नको लागि व्यवसायहरू ज्ञापन पत्र बोकेर शीर्ष नेताहरूको घरमा धाइरहेका छन्। धरातले यथार्थ हाम्रो यो छ, हामी चाहिँ ठुलो ठुलो कनेक्टिभिटीको कुराहरू गर्छौँ, त्यसले उत्साह त बढाउला, तर बढी उत्साह भयो भने कति त्यो नकारात्मकतामा त परिणत हुँदैन भन्ने डर र संशय पनि छ होला। यो FTA र लोन कि ग्रान्टको विषयमा यहाँको अवधारणा र बुझाइ के छ?
निसन्देह समाधि फ्री ट्रेड एग्रिमेन्टको बारेमा निष्कर्षमा पुग्न हतार गर्नु हुँदैन। चीनसँग मात्रै किन, हामीले लामो समयदेखि बङ्गलादेशसँग पनि यस विषयमा कुराकानीहरू गरिरहेका छौँ। जबकि बङ्गलादेश हाम्रो साह्रै ठुलो ट्रेड पार्टनर होइन, तर पनि हामीले धेरै थोरै चिज मात्रै त्यहाँ पठाउँछौँ, त्यहाँबाट धेरै चिजहरू ल्याउने भएको हुनाले चाहिँ अहिले त्यस विषयमा हामी अझै पनि टुङ्गोमा छैनौँ। त्यस भएर जबसम्म आफ्नो देशको प्रोडक्सन क्यापासिटी बढ्दैन र आफ्नो एक्सपोर्टेबल गुड्सहरू पर्याप्त मात्रामा चाहिँ तयार हुँदैन, त्यस्तो बेलामा गरिने FTAहरू त्यो देशका लागि चाहिँ उपयुक्त नहुन सक्छन्। त्यसो भएर नै यो विषयमा चाहिँ अध्ययन गर्दै जाउँ, सम्भावनाका क्षेत्रहरू हेर्दै जाउँ, तर यसमा हतारिएर निर्णय नगरौँ भन्ने नै हो। मलाई म पनि अहिले तत्कालै चाहिँ FTA चीनसँग मात्रै होइन थुप्रै देशहरूसँग चाहिँ नेपालले गर्न सक्ने अथवा गर्ने बेला भएको छैन भन्ने मलाई लाग्छ। हाम्रो फोकस चाहिँ हाम्रो आफ्नो राष्ट्रिय उत्पादन क्षमता कसरी बढाउन सकिन्छ त्यसमा केन्द्रित हुनुपर्छ भन्ने म ठान्दछु। अब जहाँसम्म यो लोनको विषय हो, म फेरि पनि यहाँलाई आग्रह गर्न चाहन्छु, यो यसरी पनि हामी बहस नगरौँ कि BRI इक्वल्स टु लोन, त्यो पनि 4% लोन कहाँबाट आयो? चीनले नेपाललाई हामी 4%मा लिन्छौँ कि लिन्नौँ भनेको छ कि, अथवा नेपालले 4%मा लिउँ भनेर मागेको छ? आज टेक्निकल कुरा भयो जस्तो मलाई लाग्छ। हामी फाइनेन्सियल डिस्कसनमा त फाइनेन्सियल मोडालिटीको बारेमा त प्रवेशै गरेका छैनौँ। इभन भर्खर बल्ल 9वटा योजनाहरू छनौट भएर तीमध्ये हामीले केही चिजलाई भनेका छौँ तपाईँहरूले ग्रान्टमा गरिदिनुपर्छ, केही चिजमा सायद साझेदारीमा पनि गर्न सकिएला, केही चिजमा लोन लिन्छौँ, तर हामीले हाम्रो लोन तिर्न सक्ने कपेसिटी अनुसार मात्रै गर्छौँ कि भनेका छौँ भनेदेखि चाहिँ पहिले एउटा यस्तो किसिमको वातावरण सृजना गर्ने कि BRI भनेकै लोन हो, लोन भनेको चाहिँ एकदमै महँगो लोन हो र त्यो भनेकै डेट ट्र्याप हो भन्ने ढङ्गले प्रस्तुत गरिने कुरा यो उपयुक्त हो जस्तो मलाई लाग्दैन। डेट ट्र्याप चाइनिज लोनले मात्रै हुन्छ जस्तो मलाई लाग्दैन। मैले बुझेसम्म अहिले ल्याटिन अमेरिकी थुप्रै देशहरू ऋणको अप्ठ्यारो चुनौतीसँग जुझिरहेका छन्। मलाई लाग्छ त्यहाँ चीनले ल्यान्ड गरेको छैन। तरिका मिलाउन जानिएन भने वर्ल्ड ब्याङ्कबाट लिए पनि, IMFबाट लिए पनि, ADB-बाट लिए पनि, AIIB-बाट लिए पनि, जेबाट लिए पनि फस्छ। त्यो त हाम्रो पर्सनल जीवनमा जस्तै हो नि। तपाईँको महिनाको 50,000 आम्दानी छैन, गाडी किन्नुहुन्छ BMW अथवा मर्सिडिज, हायर गर्नुहुन्छ एकदम राम्रो ड्राइभर, खानुहुन्छ 5 स्टारमा अथवा चाहिँ चलेका रेस्टुरेन्टमा भने त हामी आफै पनि काट पाइदिन्छौँ त। त्यस भएर लोन होस् अथवा अनुदान, ध्यान दिनुपर्ने कुरा त्यो हाम्रो राष्ट्रिय प्राथमिकताको योजना हो कि होइन, त्यसले हाम्रो त्यो ढङ्गको स्टिमुलस गर्छ कि गर्दैन, त्यसले हाम्रो आर्थिक उसलाई चाहिँ ग्रोथलाई सहयोग गर्छ कि गर्दैन। एक दोस्रो, त्यसमा त्यसले ल्याएका कन्डिसनहरू त हुन्छन्, लोनमा पनि हुन्छन्, ग्रान्टमा पनि हुन्छन्, ती कन्डिसनहरू हाम्रो नेसनल इन्ट्रेस्टसँग चाहिँ कन्ट्राडिक्ट गर्छन् कि गर्दैनन्, र त्यसलाई ह्यान्डल गर्ने हाम्रो क्यापासिटी के छ। अर्थ मन्त्रालयको बाह्य आर्थिक सहायता नीति जुन छ त्यसले कि धेरै कुराहरूलाई भनेको पनि छ, त्यसको फ्रेमभित्र रहियो भनेदेखि धेरै कुराहरू गर्न सक्दैन। जस्तो एउटा उदाहरण म यहाँ दिन्छु, भारतले हामीलाई पोस्ट अर्थक्वेक रिकन्स्ट्रक्सनमा चाहिँ 1 अरब रुपियाँ, 1 अरब डलर अथवा 1 खरब रुपियाँ चाहिँ सहायता दिने भन्यो। त्यसमध्ये 25 अरब पछि अनुदानमा र 75 अरब चाहिँ यो सफ्ट लोनमा, मतलब एक्जिम ब्याङ्कबाट लोनमा भन्यो। अब हामीलाई अप्ठ्यारो के पर्यो भन्दाखेरि बनाउँछ इन्डिभिजुअलका घरहरू, त्यहाँ हामीले गाइडलाइन बनाएका छौँ, सकेसम्म स्थानीय र मेटेरियल र स्थानीय स्किलबाट प्रयोग गरेर घर बनाउने भनेका छौँ। अब भारतीय ठेकेदार र भारतीय चाहिँ सामग्री ल्याएर त हाम्रो त्यो पुनर्निर्माणको लक्ष्य नै पुरा नहुने हो। त्यसपछि हामीले भन्यौँ त्यो 75 अरब बराबरको रकम नेपाल सरकारले आफ्नो उसबाट हाल्छ, आफ्नो खल्तीबाट अथवा आफ्नो कोषबाट हाल्छ, तपाईँले ल्याएको दिने भनेको लोन चाहिँ हामी हाइवे बनाउनको निम्ति प्रयोग गर्छौँ भनेर अहिले सायद सिद्धार्थ राजमार्गको बुटोल पोखराखण्ड या अरू विभिन्न ठाउँहरूको निम्ति त्यसलाई ट्रान्सफर गर्ने खालका कुराहरू भएको छ। भन्दाखेरि एउटा देशको कुरा मात्रै होइन, यस्ता ऋणहरूमा अमिल्ला खालका शर्तहरू अरूबाट पनि आउँछन्। त्यस भएर हामीले एकदम ब्यालेन्स र एकदम अब्जेक्टिभ हिसाबले यसको बारेमा चाहिँ विश्लेषण गर्नुपर्छ भन्ने मलाई लाग्छ। त्यसो भएको हुनाले चाहिँ हामीले पहिलो कुरा नेपालका निम्ति हाम्रा प्राथमिकताका क्षेत्रहरू के हुन्, जहाँसम्म रेल हाम्रो निम्ति प्राथमिकताको हो कि होइन, त्यसले चाहिँ तुरन्त रेट अफ रिटर्न दिन्छ कि दिँदैन भन्ने कुरा हो। केही चिजहरू यस्ता हुन्छन् कुनै पनि देशको सार्वभौम सत्ताका लागि जहाँ तपाईँले विशुद्ध त्यसलाई कमर्सियल पोइन्ट अफ भ्यूबाट मात्रै हेर्न सक्नुहुन्न, हेर्नु हुँदैन। देशको अटोनोमीको लागि, देशको ट्रान्जिट डाइभर्सिफिकेसनका लागि, तपाईँको भनौँ न व्यापारिक र पारवहन सुविधाहरूका लागि चाहिँ कति चिजहरू हुन्छन्, कति यस्ता इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चरहरू हुन्छन् जहाँ तत्काल त्यसले रिटर्न नदिए पनि तपाईँले लगानी गर्नुपर्ने हुन्छ। त्यसले दीर्घकालसम्म त्यसका अरू सोसल र अरू खालका चाहिँ तपाईँले बेनिफिटहरू लिन सक्नुहुन्छ। त्यसो भएको हुनाले चाहिँ हामीले त्यसरी हेर्नुपर्छ। अहिले नै जब पहिला यसको प्रायोरिटी चाहिँ कसरी हुनु पऱ्यो भने हामीले 9 वटा छनौट गरेका परियोजना अझै यसमा पनि थप केही पुनर्विचार गर्नुपर्छ भने गरौँ। तीमध्ये त्यस पछाडि बल्ल चाइनिज पक्षसँग बसेर छलफल गरौँ कि यी कुराहरू हाम्रा प्राथमिकता हुन्। अब यसमा चाहिँ फाइनेन्सियल मोडालिटी चाहिँ के हो, फाइनेन्सियल मोडालिटीको बारेमा छलफल गरेपछि उहाँहरूले यतिमा गर्छौँ, यति अनुदान गर्छौँ, यति चाहिँ के अरे लोन भन्छौँ भन्नुहुन्छ भने बल्ल त्यहाँनिर टर्म्सको कुरा आउँछ र त्यसो गरिरहँदाखेरि हामीले तिर्न सक्ने हाम्रो क्षमता, त्यसले दिने लाभ, यी कुराहरूको आधारमा हेर्नुपर्छ।
हस्, धन्यवाद। हामीले यो BRI भनिरहँदा आज मलाई लाग्छ हामीले यो मेटाफोरका रूपमा पनि प्रयोग गरेको। BRI जस्तै अरू परियोजनामा चाहिँ हाम्रो गृह कार्य के छ त, सदैव एउटा भाष्य निर्माण भइरहेछ कि हामीले आफ्नो राष्ट्रिय स्वार्थलाई केन्द्रमा राख्न सकेनौँ। भारत आउँदा भारत जस्तै, चीन आउँदा चीन जस्तै र अमेरिका आउँदा अमेरिका जस्तै बन्ने होडमा हामीले नेपाल जस्तो बन्न बिर्सिन्छौँ भन्ने भाष्य छ नि, त्यहाँनिर हामीले कति काम गर्नुपर्छ भन्ने विषय पनि हो। जस्तो डाक्टर महत, हामीले यो BRI-मा त फाइनेन्सियल मोडालिटी नै तय गरेको छैन, कसरी अगाडि बढ्ने भनेर हाम्रै तर्फबाट धेरै काम गर्नुपर्ने देखियो। ग्रान्ट के लोन भन्नेमा हामी स्पष्ट छैनौँ। यहाँनिर हाम्रो आफ्नो संयन्त्र कहाँ छ, त्यो संयन्त्र हामी कसरी बनाउने, BRI-लाई मात्रै लिएर होइन, ठुला परियोजनाहरू आयोजना हामीले अङ्गीकार गर्दाखेरि हामी कसरी बढ्नुपर्छ त भनेर एउटा फ्री इन्डिपेन्डेन्ट हामीसँग एउटा मेकानिजम बनाउनु ढिला भएन?
अवश्य पनि हाम्रो यो कार्यान्वयन मेकानिजम एकदम ठिठोलो छ। हाम्रो यो राजनीतिक सत्ता छिटो परिवर्तन भइराख्ने, ब्युरोक्रेसी धेरै चलिराख्ने, त्यसले गर्दाखेरि हाम्रो इन्स्टिट्युसनहरू चाहिँ कमजोर छन्। हाम्रो आन्तरिक नै बजेट इम्प्लिमेन्टेसनको कुरा हेर्ने हो भने हाम्रो पुँजीगत खर्चको हालत एकदम खस्ता छ। त्यस हुनाले जब हामी यो अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय तहको प्रोजेक्टहरू आउँछ, सहयोग दिने कुराहरू आउँछ, सेवा शर्तका विषयहरू आउँछ या त्यसको चाहिँ लागत लाभ हानिका विषयमा सघन अध्ययन गर्नुपर्ने हुन्छ। त्यसको लागि इन्स्टिट्युसनल मेकानिजम चाहिन्छ र त्यसमा हामीले चाहिँ यथेष्ट ध्यान दिनुपर्छ। राज्य संयन्त्र गम्भीर हुनुपर्छ, त्यसमा दुई मात्रै छैन। त्यो भएन भनेदेखि हाम्रा सबै निर्णयहरू हचुवामा हामी गर्न थाल्यौँ भनेदेखि अनि त्यसपछि हामी पश्चाताप गर्नुपर्ने अवस्थामा हुन्छौँ। त्यस हुनाले मलाई लाग्छ जुन एउटा सर्ट लिस्टेड यी आयोजनाहरू छन् त्यसमा पनि अझ सबभन्दा ज्यादा प्राथमिकताका आयोजनाहरू कुन कुन हुन्, नभई नहुने आयोजनाहरू कुन कुन हुन्, जस्तो उहाँले चाहिँ रेलको कुरा गर्नुभयो। अब अहिले हामीले यो बाटै जुन चाहिँ विभिन्न नाकाबाट बाटोको कुरा गरेका छौँ त्यसमा त्यति कस्ट ज्यादा पनि लाग्दैन र हाम्रो जुन स्थानीय जिल्ला त्यहाँको जनसमुदायलाई फाइदा हुने पनि कुराहरू आउँछन्। त्यसबाट हाम्रो अहिले चल्ने आवश्यक ट्रेड र पिपुलको आवत जावतलाई पनि त्यसले प्रशस्त ठाउँ दिन्छ भन्ने मलाई लाग्छ। र जहाँसम्म अब यो चाहिँ एक्सपेन्सिभ टाइपको चाहिँ प्रोजेक्ट हो, अब रेल जस्तो प्रोजेक्टमा चाहिँ हामीले चाहिँ त्यसलाई चाहिँ अहिले चाहिँ थाँती राख्न सक्छौँ। र उहाँहरूले गुडविल देखाएर हामी ग्रान्डै बनाइदिन्छौँ भन्नुभयो भने त्यसलाई चाहिँ हामीले चाहिँ फेरि चाहिँ हुँदैन भन्नुपर्ने कुनै कारण छैन। विल वेलकम, भारतको रेललाई पनि वेलकम गर्छौँ, चिनको रेललाई पनि वेलकम गर्छौँ। त्यस कारण चाहिँ त्यसको विकल्प के छ, जस्तो अहिले चाहिँ हामी ट्रेड मान्छेको आवत जावतको लागि विकल्पहरू त चाहियो नि जुन भन्ने प्रश्न आएको छ। त्यसमा चाहिँ यो रोड ट्रान्सपोर्टेसनले चाहिँ त्यो चाहिँ कुराहरू चाहिँ पुरा गर्न सक्छ। जस्तो अहिले यही नुवाकोट जोड्ने छ अरे टोखा चाहिँ चुरुङमा, यहाँ टोखाबाट चाहिँ छ अरे चाहिँ 25 किलोमिटर छ। 3 किलोमिटरको चाहिँ सुरुङ चाहिँ बनाउँदाखेरि त्यो 22 किलोमिटर ती जोडिन्छ। त्यसबाट चाहिँ चीनसम्म जाने मात्र होइन कि पृथ्वी हाइवेलाई समेत त्यसको चाहिँ छोटो पार्छ। यस्ता आयोजनाहरूलाई चाहिँ हामीले चाहिँ सहयोगको प्राथमिकतामा राख्नु पर्यो। अनि रोड ट्राभलै त्यो चाहिँ 1 घन्टामा वहाँ पुगिन्छ। रोड ट्राभलबाटै काठमाडौँबाट 1 घन्टामा पुगिन्छ नि, चीनको बोर्डरमा पुगिन्छ। त्यसलाई प्राथमिकता राख्नु पर्यो। र यो अहिले चाहिँ त्यस कारण नेपालको तर्फबाट पनि यथेष्ट तयारी हुनु पर्यो। सँगसँगै अहिले चाहिँ पछिल्लो अवस्थामा कोभिडको कारणबाट पनि होला र अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय अनुभवका कारणले चाहिँ चीनले पनि यसमा चाहिँ यसको चाहिँ मोडालिटीको बारेमा रिथिङ्क गरिराखेका होला। त्यस अर्थमा पनि उताबाट पनि अब यसलाई चाहिँ हाई प्रायोरिटी दिने कुरा चाहिँ हाम्रो मात्रै कुरो होइन, उहाँहरूको दिने रिसिपेन्ट कन्ट्रीको मात्र होइन, जसले चाहिँ प्रपोज गरेका छ उहाँहरूको चाहिँ उत्सुकता र जागरुकतामा पनि निर्भर गर्छ। दुइटै हातले मात्रै ताली गर्छ भन्ने कुरा हो। हामी चाहिँ एभर रेडी भइराख्नुपर्छ। हाम्रो आफ्नो तर्फबाट चाहिँ जे तयारी हुनुपर्छ त्यो तयारी चाहिँ हामीले गर्नुपर्छ। सँगसँगै उहाँहरूको पनि यसमा चाहिँ उत्साह अब कति छ, के छ, त्यस विषयमा पनि अब हामीले चाहिँ गम्भीर छलफलको चाहिँ क्षणमा प्रवेश गर्नुपर्छ र नेपालको बेनिफिटको प्रोजेक्टमा हामीले लगानी गर्नुपर्छ। म चाहिँ चारवटा पोइन्ट भन्छु, तपाईँले सकुन थाले भए मैले चाहिँ यो टिपिहाल्छु। यो त्यो भनौँ यो उसमै रहेछ, यो अलिक पढ्न अप्ठ्यारो हो। म चारवटा पोइन्ट आई वुड लाइक टु mention 4 points regarding this BRI project. First, wide consultation in the identification, conceptualization and implementation of the project is must for the success of BRI projects. Thus, the BRI project should be selected on the basis of national consensus with in-depth cost-benefit analysis and stakeholders' adequate voices, including that of major political parties and private sector in feasibility studies. It ensures transparency and ownership of the project. Second, It should avoid environmentally unsustainable and economically non-viable projects. The funding mechanism of the project should be an appropriate blend of grants and preferential loans. The terms and conditions of the loan should be at par with multilateral financial institutions and without any strings of conditions attached, such as guaranteed return and sourcing of inputs. Third, BRI projects need to be designed in such a manner that it maximizes forward and backward linkages with the domestic economy and uses domestic materials, knowledge, skills and labor wherever appropriate. It guarantees the sustainability of the project. The fourth, development is not merely building infrastructure, it is building productive capacity of the nation and enhancing capability of the citizens. For this to happen, acquisition, adoption and technology and use of technology is the key. Thus, we expect technology transfer as a central component of each BRI project. And let me say, quote President Xi Jinping, let BRI help achieve few common prosperity instead of the mere satisfaction of the self-interest. अब यो भयो भने I think this BRI initiative will be beneficial for Nepal. So we should focus and we should work for implementation based on these 4 points that I raised. Thank you.
हस् धन्यवाद अलिकति हामी अन्त्यतर्फमै आइसकेका छौँ म प्रदीप ज्ञवालीज्यूलाई अर्को एउटा प्रश्न राख्न चाहे जस्तो चिनिया प्रभाव विश्वमै बढिरहेको छ त्यो एक्सेल हुने क्रममै छ होइन जसरी सी जिनपिङ चीनमा शक्तिशाली अझै शक्तिशाली बनेर आइरहनु भएको छ त्यसको प्रभाव नेपालमा पनि पर्छ जस्तो पोलिसी एक्सचेन्ज भनेर भनेको छौँ नि हामीले त्यो बीआरआईको एउटा क्लजमा त्यो पोलिसी एक्सचेन्ज भनेको चाहिँ के हो नेपालमा पछिल्लो समय चिनिया विशिष्ट अधिकारीहरूको भ्रमण पनि बाक्लिएको छ कता कता त्यो पोलिसी एक्सचेन्ज भनेको सी विचारधारालाई नै हामी प्रवर्धन गर्दै अगाडि बढ्ने बाटोमा छौँ कि भन्ने शङ्का पनि व्याप्त छ किन भन्दा पारदर्शी रूपमा चिजहरू आएन भने मानिसहरूले प्रश्न गर्छन् तर प्रश्नले नै फेरि सम्भावना पनि देखाउँछ त्यसकारणले गर्दा यो पोलिसी एक्सचेन्जका बारेमा अलिकति क्लियर गरिदिनु हुन्थ्यो कि जसरी सीको विचारधारालाई नै प्रवर्धन गर्दै हामी अगाडि बढ्ने बाटोमा त छैनौँ भन्ने प्रश्नमा तपाईँको जवाब
धन्यवाद सनाजी पहिलो कुरा विश्व शक्ति सन्तुलनमा एउटा ऱ्यापिड चेन्ज आइरहेको त हामी सबैले देखि नै रहेका छौँ एउटा अहिले विद्यमान रहेको विश्व शक्ति छ ऊ एकैछिनले सेचुरेसनमा पुगे जस्तो युएस चाहिँ एउटा टपमा छ र कैयौँ एस्पेक्टमा ऊ डिक्लाइनिङ स्थितिमा पनि देखिन्छ चीन उदाइरहेको छ र उसले आफ्नो प्रभावको क्षेत्र विस्तार गर्न खोजि नै रहेको छ र हाम्रो सन्दर्भ ग्लोबल कन्टेक्स्टमा त्यति देखिँदैन तर हाम्रो सन्दर्भमा हामीले बिर्सनै नहुने अर्को पक्ष भारत पनि हो जसले क्षेत्रीय शक्ति त छँदैछ ऊ पनि विश्व शक्तिको एस्पिरेसनसहित अगाडि बढिरहेको छ उहाँहरूका इन्ट्रेस्टको बिचमा प्रतिस्पर्धा छ र यो प्रतिस्पर्धाले एक खालको चुनौती एक खालको स्ट्रेस चाहिँ हामी सबैले यो अप्ठ्यारो बेलामा हाम्रा राष्ट्रिय हितलाई नेभिगेट गर्नको लागि चाहिँ हामीलाई अलिकति कठिनाइहरू परिरहेको हामीलाई सन्तुलन कायम राख्न गाह्रो भइरहेको पहिले सरकार बनिसकेपछि सुरु हुने दौडको पहिले सरकार बन्नुभन्दा अगाडि नै घर दैलो देउसी भैलो जस्तो हुन थालिरहेको यो त सबै हामीले आफ्नै घर आँगनमा देखिरहेका छौँ सो विश्वको यो बदलिदो शक्ति सन्तुलनभित्र आफ्ना राष्ट्रिय हितहरूलाई कायम राख्दै र हाम्रा मित्र राष्ट्रहरूलाई आश्वस्त तुल्याउँदै कि नेपालको एउटा मात्र स्वार्थ नेपालको आफ्नो राष्ट्रिय हित हो हामी तपाईँहरू कसैका पनि विपक्षमा जाँदैनौँ कुनै पनि पक्षमा हामी उभिँदैनौँ कुनै पनि एलायन्सको स्ट्राटेजीको प्याक्टको हामी चाहिँ के भन्दा पार्ट बन्दैनौँ सन्तुलित परराष्ट्र नीति हाम्रो चाहिँ नीति हो र हाम्रो भूमि हाम्रा तपाईँहरूका चाहिँ जेन्युन इन्ट्रेस्टको विरुद्ध प्रयोग गर्न दिन्नौँ भन्ने कुरा आश्वस्त तुल्याउँदै अगाडि बढ्ने चुनौती निश्चय नै थपिएको छ। किनभने नेपाल अब हिजो शीत युद्धको बेलामा हामी अलिक टाढै थियौँ, किन नेपालको त्यति ठुलो महत्त्व सायद त्यति बेला बढिसकेका थिएन होला। अहिले चीन र अमेरिकाको बिचमा प्रतिस्पर्धा बढ्दै जाँदा दक्षिण एसिया र त्यसमाथि पनि नेपालको महत्त्व बढेको छ र नेपालमाथि त्यो स्ट्रेस पनि थपिँदैछ। हामीले हाम्रो सन्तुलनलाई एकदमै कायम गर्नुपर्छ, नम्बर 1। नम्बर 2, विकास सहायता परियोजनाहरू हामीले विकास सहायता परियोजनाकै रूपमा त्यही आँखाले हेर्नु जरुरी छ। अननेसेसरी बहसले हामीलाई कहीँ पनि पुर्याउँदैन। 2010 देखि छलफल गर्दै गयौँ, 2017 मा सम्झौता गऱ्यौँ, 21 मा आएर लडाकु मचियो एमसिसीको बारेमा। अब लामो छलफलपछि 2017 मा BRI मा छलफल गऱ्यौँ। अहिले यो रेलेभेन्ट कि इरेलेभेन्ट भन्ने ढङ्गले पनि बहस हुन्छन् भनेदेखि हामी त कहीँ पनि पुग्दैनौँ। त्यसबाट विकास परियोजनालाई विकास परियोजनाकै रूपमा लिएर त्यसलाई चाहिँ नेसनल इन्ट्रेस्टमा प्रयोग गर्न सक्ने हाम्रो सामर्थ्य बढाउनुपर्छ। अब जहाँसम्म चीनको प्रभाव बढ्यो अथवा कतै सी जिनपिङ विचारधाराको फलो गर्न खोजेको हो कि यो त बेकारको कुरा हो। चीन स्वयंले उहिले माओको पालामा नै क्रान्तिको निर्यात या आयात हुँदैन भनेर उहिले त्यो डिस्कार्ड गरिसकेको विषयमा अहिले सी जिनपिङ विचारधारा बोकेर कोही हिँड्छ, त्यो त बहसभन्दा बाहिरको कुरा हो। निस्सन्देह राम्रा कुराहरू हामीले जहाँबाट पनि सिक्न सक्छौँ। एउटा कुरा त सिक्न सकिन्छ होला नि, 40 वर्षको बिचमा 80 करोडभन्दा बढी मान्छेलाई गरिबीको रेखाबाट माथि उठाएर जुन ढङ्गको विकास गरेको छ, राम्रा कुराहरू छन् भने ती कुराहरू सिक्न हुन्छ। चीनबाट चीनको अनुभवबाट सिक्नुहुन्छ, भारतबाट भारतका अनुभवहरूबाट सिक्नुहुन्छ। राम्रा कुराहरू सिकौँ तर मोडलको आफ्नै विकास गरौँ। त्यसो भएर यहाँ सी जिनपिङ विचारधाराको अनुसरण गर्ने कुरा अथवा उहाँको इन्फ्लुएन्समा पर्ने कुरा, न हामी भारतको इन्फ्लुएन्समा, न चीनको इन्फ्लुएन्समा, न अमेरिकाको इन्फ्लुएन्समा उहाँहरूका राम्रा कुराहरू सिक्दै र उहाँहरूको अनुभवलाई उहाँहरूका भनौँ न उहाँहरूसँग राम्रो मित्रता कायम गर्दै उहाँहरूको सहयोग लिएर अगाडि बढ्ने नै नेपालले लिनुपर्ने बाटो हो जस्तो लाग्छ।
हस्, प्रश्न गर्न त पाइयो नि
एकदम
अलिक अन्त्यमा पनि आएको छ। जस्तो यो एनसिसी परियोजना अगाडि बढिसकेपछि जस्तो बिआरकै कुरा गर्दा 16 देखि नै सतहमा आएको छलफलमा आएको 17 मे 22 मा MOU भयो होइन। अहिले आएर चाहिँ यो BRI-का विषयमा पनि अलिकति एग्रेसिभली अब फिजिबिलिटी अध्ययन गर्ने हो कि के गर्ने हो, अगाडि बढौँ भन्ने चीनको अवधारणा। चीन र अमेरिकाको नेपालमा आपसी यो भू राजनैतिक द्वन्द्व जस्तै एनसिसीको बेलामा पनि देखियो होइन, त्यसले नेपाललाई कूटनीतिक रूपमा अप्ठ्यारो पार्न सक्ने सम्भावना के छ? यसलाई हामीले कसरी ब्यालेन्स गर्न सक्छौँ होला? अघि नै भने जस्तै राष्ट्रिय रूपमा प्रयोग गरेर।
अब यसमा के छ भने यो हामीमै निर्भर छ। हामीले हाम्रो हित हेर्नु छ, नेपालको आवश्यकता हेर्नु छ, नेपालको स्वार्थ हेर्नु छ। सबैले त्यही गर्छन्। अरूले गरे जस्तो, तपाईँहरूले गरे जस्तो हामीले पनि गरेका छौँ भन्दाखेरि उहाँहरूसँग पनि जवाफ हुँदैन। जब हामी त्यसबाट डिपार्ट गर्न थाल्छौँ, कहिले यता फर्किया जस्तो, कहिले उता फर्किया जस्तो, कहिले यता टिल्ट गरे जस्तो, कहिले उता टिल्ट गरे जस्तो गर्न थाल्यो भने समस्या आउँछ। ओहोरदोहोर पनि ज्यादै बढ्छ, चासो चिन्ता पनि ज्यादा बढ्छ। हामी चाहिँ स्ट्राटेजिक सेन्टरमा छौँ। त्यस हुनाले मलाई लाग्छ शुद्ध रूपमा हामीले एउटा नेसनल कन्सेन्सस, हामी नेपालको हित र आवश्यकतामा केन्द्रित छौँ। जुन बिन्दुमा हाम्रो हित र हाम्रा मित्र राष्ट्रहरूको हित एक ठाउँ मर्ज गर्छ, एउटै मिल्छ, त्यो ठाउँमा मात्रै हामी चाहिँ सम्झौता गर्छौँ। चीनको कुरा आउँदा पनि, भारतको कुरा आउँदा पनि। सँगसँगै हामी एउटाको विरुद्ध अर्कोको लागि उपयोग हुँदैनौँ। यति कुरामा हामी स्पष्ट हुने बित्तिकै कुनै समस्या हुँदैन जस्तो लाग्छ। र नेपाली काङ्ग्रेसको के पोलिसी छ भने यो छिमेकीसँगको सम्बन्धको कुरा गर्दा त्यो देशको राजनैतिक प्रणाली के छ र कहाँ त्यसको नेतृत्व को छ भन्ने आधारमा हामीले फरेन पोलिसी कन्डक्ट गर्न थाल्यौँ भने हामी अप्ठ्यारोमा पर्छौँ। हामी आफ्नो आवश्यकता र स्वार्थका आधारमा फरेन रिलेसनसिप बिल्डअप गर्ने हुनाले जुनसुकै पोलिटिकल सिस्टम होस्, हामी आफ्नो कुराहरू राख्छौँ र एउटा चाहिँ समान सोचका साथ सम्बन्ध विकसित गर्छौँ र हाम्रो त्यो इन्ट्रेस्ट फुलफिल भएसम्म त्यही तहको हामी सम्बन्ध विकसित गर्छौँ भन्ने कुरामा विश्वास गर्छौँ। त्यस कारण बिपी कोइरालाले धेरै अगाडि त्यसमा माओ सेतुङ हुनुहुन्थ्यो। हाम्रो पोलिटिकल विचारधारा मिल्दैन, अहिले पनि मिल्दैन। चीनको चाहिँ पोलिटिकल सिस्टम र विचारधारा र हाम्रो चाहिँ पोलिटिकल विचारधारा मिल्दैन। तर त्यसको मतलब यो होइन कि चीनसँग हामी सम्बन्धै राख्दैन भन्ने कुरा आउँदैन। हामीले बेस्ट अफ द बेस्ट रिलेसनसिप राख्ने हो चीनसँग पनि, भारतमा पनि। र अन्य पोलिटिकल विचारधारा भएका नेपालका राष्ट्रिय पार्टीहरूले पनि त्यही सोचका साथ कि यो त हाम्रो विचारधारासँग मिल्ने, त्यस कारण यसमा चाहिँ हामीले भने चाहिँ जे पनि आँखा चिम्लेर यस भन्नुपर्छ, अर्कोले भने हरेकमा क्वेसन गर्नुपर्छ भन्ने कुराबाट हामी चाहिँ माथि उठेर चाहिँ हाम्रो फरेन पोलिसी चाहिँ कन्डक्ट गर्नुपर्छ भन्ने मलाई लाग्छ। र यो BRI प्रोजेक्टको जहाँसम्म सवाल छ, BRI प्रोजेक्ट यो चाहिँ इनिसिएटिभलाई हामीले चाहिँ स्वीकार गरेका छौँ। तर अब चाहिँ इच प्रोजेक्ट सुड बी डेल्ट सिरियसली र त्यसको चाहिँ हाम्रो चाहिँ इकोनोमीमा के फाइदा दिन्छ, के शर्तमा सहयोग आइरहेका छ, जुन कुरो मैले 4वटा पोइन्ट चाहिँ उल्लेख गरेँ, त्यसका आधारमा हामी चाहिँ सघन वार्ता चीनसँग गर्नुपर्छ र हाम्रा कुराहरू जुन हामीले चाहिँ उल्लेख गरेका छौँ त्यसका आधारमा उहाँहरूले त्यो सहयोग बढाउँदा त्यसलाई हामीले स्वागत गर्नुपर्छ।
यसमा प्रदीपजीको पनि रेस्पोन्स आए। चीन र अमेरिकालाई नेपालले हेर्ने दृष्टिकोण, चीन र अमेरिकाले नेपाललाई हेर्ने दृष्टिकोण, भाइस वर्सा, यसमा हामीले ब्यालेन्स कसरी क्रिएट गर्न सक्छौँ होला?
पहिलो कुरा, हामी सबभन्दा पहिले हाम्रो राष्ट्रिय हितमा दृढतापूर्वक उभियौँ भने धेरै कुराहरू त्यसैले गाइड गर्छ। त्यसो गर्दा हाम्रो राष्ट्रिय हित यसै कुरामा छ कि हामी कुनै पनि शक्ति राष्ट्रहरूको एजेन्डाका संवाहक नबनौँ, उहाँहरूको स्ट्राटेजी या इन्ट्रेस्टको संवाहक नबनौँ। हामीले हाम्रा राष्ट्रिय हितलाई केन्द्रबिन्दुमा राखौँ। उहाँहरूको बिचमा प्रतिस्पर्धा छ, राइभलरी पनि छ, होस्टाइलिटी पनि छ, तर उहाँहरूको एउटा देश होस्टाइल भयो भन्नेमा हामी त्यही आँखाले त्यो देशलाई हेर्नुपर्छ भन्ने होइन। त्यसो भएर हामीले हाम्रा सम्बन्धहरूलाई चाहिँ US भर्सेस चाइना, चाइना भर्सेस इन्डिया, इन्डिया भर्सेस अर्को कुनै देश होइन कि नेपालको बेस्ट इन्ट्रेस्टमा चाहिँ उहाँहरू सबैको सहायतालाई कसरी ल्याउने र उहाँहरूका चाहिँ प्रतिस्पर्धा र हामीलाई आफूतिर ड्र्याग गर्न खोज्ने कुराहरूबाट कसरी बच्ने भन्ने कुरामा चाहिँ हामी बढी ध्यान दिनुपर्छ जस्तो मलाई लाग्छ। त्यसो हुँदा बहस पनि MCC भर्सेस BRI यो ढङ्गले होइन कि हाम्रो देशको हितमा अधिकतम बाह्य सहायता कहाँबाट ल्याउन सकिन्छ अथवा सहयोगहरू कसरी जुटाउन सकिन्छ भन्ने कुरामा जान्छ। एउटा कुरा राखौँ समाजिक, सो हामीले 2026मा हामी चाहिँ LDC ग्रेजुएट गर्छौँ भनेर हामी अलरेडी डिक्लेयर गरिसक्यौँ, युएनले रिकमेन्ड गरिसक्यौँ। 2030सम्म हामी चाहिँ सबै SDGहरू पुरा गरेर मध्यम आय भएको मुलुकमा जान्छौँ भनेर लक्ष्य दिएका छौँ। यी सबै कुराका निम्ति अहिले हामीले जति इन्भेस्ट गरिरहेका छौँ देशमा, मुस्किलले 13-14 अरब डलर चाहिँ यो एकदम अपर्याप्त छ। त्यसलाई हामीले बढाउनु जरुरी छ। बढाउँदा हामीले देखिरहेको कुरा हो कि अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय सहायता त क्रमशः घट्दै गएको छ, अफिसियल डेभलपमेन्ट एसिस्टेन्स त घट्दै गइरहेको छ, ODA घट्दै गइरहेको छ भने हामीले या त फरेन डाइरेक्ट इन्भेस्टमेन्टबाट या त यसै परियोजनाहरूबाट सफ्ट लोनहरू या अरू सहायताहरू जुटाउँदै त्यो ग्यापलाई फुलफिल गर्नुपर्छ। यसका लागि चाहिँ हामीले त्यसलाई लेस कन्ट्रोभर्सीमा कसरी पार्ने हो, निश्चय नै ती सहायताहरूसँग जोडेर उहाँहरू ती देशहरूका आफ्ना केही जियोपोलिटिकल इन्ट्रेस्टहरू पनि होला, तर हामी त्यसमा प्रभावित नहुने, उहाँहरूको इन्ट्रेस्टको शिकार नबन्ने कुरामा सतर्कता अपनाउँदै आर्थिक सहायतालाई बढीभन्दा बढी उपयोग गर्न सक्यौँ, हाम्रो राष्ट्रिय क्षमतालाई बढाउन सक्यौँ, हाम्रो कनेक्टिभिटी विस्तार गर्न सक्यौँ, हाम्रा पूर्वाधारहरू राम्रो निर्माण हुन सक्यौँ, यी जब क्रिएट गर्न सक्यौँ भने बल्ल हाम्रो देशको राष्ट्रियता सुदृढ हुन्छ। अब प्रतिवर्ष लाखौँ युवाहरू बाहिर जाने, देशको उत्पादन क्षमता झन्झन घट्दै जाने, आज बिहानको समाचार कति अलार्मिङ छ। अहिले हामीले गरिरहेको निर्यातले 15 दिनको आयातसम्म पनि धान्न सक्दैन भन्ने। अब यो कुराबाट गम्भीर बनेर हाम्रो आफ्नो प्रोडक्सन क्यापासिटी बढाउनको लागि चाहिँ जे जस्ता खालका सहयोगहरू हाम्रो राष्ट्रिय हितमा हुन्छन् त्यसलाई चाहिँ उपयोग गर्न सक्ने हाम्रो क्षमतालाई विकास गर्नुपर्छ जस्तो लाग्छ। धन्यवाद।
हस्, हामीले यो BRI परियोजना, यसका सम्भावना, अवसर र चुनौतीका विषयमा छलफल गरिरहँदाखेरि मेरो मनमा उठेको प्रश्न चाहिँ हालै मात्र निर्वाचन सम्पन्न भएको छ। दुईजना पूर्व परराष्ट्र मन्त्री हुनुहुन्छ, परराष्ट्र मन्त्रालयलाई सशक्त नेतृत्व गर्नुभएका महानुभावहरू। यो प्रश्न पनि मेरो मनमा अहिले भर्खरै उब्जिएको कि म हेरिरहेको थिएँ सरकार गठनका लागि निर्वाचनको परिणाम आउनु पूर्व नै दलका शीर्ष नेताहरू बीच कस्तो दौडधुप, बाक्लो दौडधुप, मुखै हेर्दिन एकअर्काको भनेका नेताहरू बीच पनि संवाद भयो रे, संवादका सम्भावनाहरू, ढोकाहरू खुले रे भन्ने खालका रस्साकसीहरू नि। त्यति बाक्लो छलफल, मिहिन छलफल सरकार बनाउने र गिराउनेमा हाम्रा दलहरूले गर्छन् भने अघि यहाँहरूले नै दिनुभयो नि त्यो आँकडा चाहिँ हाम्रो निर्यात बढाउने कसरी, होइन, आयात केन्द्रित अर्थतन्त्र छ त्यसलाई कम कसरी बनाउने, अथवा भारतलाई हेर्ने अब हाम्रो दृष्टिकोण के होला, चीनबाट हामी कसरी लाभ लिने भन्ने यो हाम्रो राष्ट्रिय हित भनेर अघिदेखि भनिरहेका छौँ नि। यस्ता विषयमा हामी छलफल कति चलाउँछौँ, हाम्रो नेताहरूको प्राथमिकता कति पर्छ, यो विषय चाहिँ प्रकाशजीबाट, प्रकाश सर महज्यूबाट।
यसलाई उच्च प्राथमिकतामा राख्नुपर्छ। हामी गम्भीर हुनु जरुरी छ। अहिलेको पिँढी अत्यन्त व्यग्र छ, चाँडोभन्दा चाँडो परिवर्तन खोजिराखेको छ, आर्थिक समृद्धि खोजिराखेको छ, देशैभरि रोजगारी सुनिश्चित होस् भनी खोजिराखेको छ। सामाजिक सञ्जालको जमाना छ, हरेक युवाहरूको हातमा स्मार्टफोन छ, संसार यीबाट चाहिँ देखिन्छ, कम्पेयर गर्छ, तुलना गर्छ। हाम्रो परिवेश कुन परिवेशबाट हामी उठ्यौँ, कस्ता कस्ता चुनौतीहरू हामीले भोग्नु पर्यो, त्योभन्दा त्यो सुन्न कोही तयार छैन। तपाईँले हामीलाई यहाँको जस्तो किन भयो नेपालमा, यसको कारण तिमीहरू त होइन भन्ने चाहिँ प्रश्न चाहिँ इस्टाब्लिस पार्टीहरूलाई चाहिँ प्रश्न तेर्साइरहेको अवस्था छ। त्यो चाहिँ यो निर्वाचनको ट्रेन्डबाट पनि देखिएको छ। त्यसकारण अब देश र जनताभन्दा हाम्रो लागि अरू कुनै प्राथमिकता छैन। अब पार्टी व्यक्तिको लाभ हानि भन्दा माथि उठेर रात दिन एक गरेर तल्लीन भएर हरेक विषयलाई गम्भीर रूपमा लिएर, चाहे अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय सम्बन्धको विषय होस्, अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय सहयोगको कुरा होस्, देशमा उत्पादन बढाउने कुरा होस्, लगानी ल्याउने कुरा होस्, त्यसमा हामी गम्भीर हुनुपर्छ र त्यसको लागि हामी सबैले कोलाबोरेसन गर्छ। यो दल नबनिकन सबैको साझा दृष्टिकोण विकसित गरेर चाहिँ अगाडि बढ्नुको कुनै विकल्प छैन। लगानी, पुँजीगत लगानी वृद्धि नभइकन उद्योग व्यवसाय बढ्दैन, उद्योग व्यवसाय नबढिकन रोजगारी बढ्दैन, रोजगारी नबढिकन यो युवाहरूको चाहिँ रोजगारीको लागि विदेशमाथिको निर्भरता घट्दैन। त्यसकारण एउटै पोइन्ट, एउटा यो लगानी मैत्री वातावरण बनाउने, सहयोग दिन सक्ने ठाउँ सहयोग लिने, नभए चाहिँ निजी लगानी विदेशमा बसेका नेपालीहरू, विदेशीहरू र नेपालमा बसेका नेपालीहरू जसको पुँजी छ, क्षमता छ, योग्यता छ, मैले यो देशमा प्रयोग गर्न पाइनँ भनेर कसैले पनि गुनासो गर्ने चाहिँ ठाउँ नरहोस्। त्यसका प्रति हामीले सम्पूर्ण हाम्रो चाहिँ ध्यान हामीले केन्द्रित गर्नुपर्छ र रात दिन एक गरेर चाहिँ हामीले काम गर्नुपर्छ। त्यसमा कुनै विकल्प
साह्रै रेडिमेड जवाफ दिनुभयो तपाईँले। यस सम्बन्धी हामी काम चाहिँ गर्छौँ, अब छलफल चाहिँ गर्छौँ। ठिक छ, अन्तिम अहिले मेरो अन्तिम प्रश्न हुनेछ। मलाई दिनुभएको समय अब 3 मिनट मात्रै बाँकी छ। म प्रदीप ज्वालीज्यूलाई यही प्रश्न राख्न चाहन्छु। निर्यात बढाउने विषयमा, होइन, राष्ट्रिय कन्सेन्सस बिल्ड गर्ने विषयमा, पुँजीगत खर्च किन बढेन भनेर बहस गर्ने विषयमा, रोजगारी कसरी सृजना गर्न सकिन्छ भन्ने विषयमा हामी छलफल यही मेन ढङ्गले चलाउँछौँ जसरी सरकार निर्माणमा हामीले ऊर्जा प्रयोग गरेका छौँ।
स्पष्ट भन्नुपर्दा हामी गर्दैनौँ। हाम्रो बिग्रदो अर्थतन्त्र हाम्रो एजेन्डा बनिरहेको छैन आजका मितिसम्म। सिरियस एजेन्डा जति फोकस हामी सत्ता साझेदारीमा, सत्ताको बाँडफाँडमा, सिधैको बाँडफाँडमा केन्द्रित भएको छ, त्यसको तुलनामा चाहिँ यसको यो गम्भीर बन्दै गरेको आर्थिक सङ्कट या चुनौतीहरूको बारेमा हाम्रा छलफलहरू एकदमै कम छन्। सायद त्यही कारणले होला जनअसन्तुष्टि पनि बढ्दो छ, सामाजिक एक खालको गुनासोहरू पनि बढ्दैछन्। यो कुरालाई चाहिँ समयमै सम्बोधन गरेर यी विषयहरूलाई हामीले अब राष्ट्रिय बहसको केन्द्रमा ल्याउनुपर्छ र मिनिमम कन्सेन्सस चाहिँ यसमा बिल्ड गर्नुपर्छ। अन्यथा चाहिँ ठुलो राजनीतिक परिवर्तन हामीले लिइरहेका छौँ। त्यो परिवर्तन जनतासँग, जनताको जीवनसँग जोडिएन भने बिस्तारै बिस्तारै त्यो चाहिँ जनताबाटै अस्वीकृत हुन सक्ने या जनताबाट टाढिँदै जान सक्ने जोखिम छ। त्यो जोखिमलाई सबैले चाहिँ एउटा सेन्स गर्नुपर्छ।
हवस्, यहाँहरू दुवैजनालाई समय र विचारका लागि धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद व्यक्त गर्न चाहन्छु। आफ्नो समय दिनुभयो, हवस्, धन्यवाद। र यहाँहरू सबैजनालाई धन्यवाद ध्यान दिएर यो छलफलमा सहभागी हुनुभयो। अन्तिममा म खासै केही भन्न त चाहन्न, तर जसरी चीन विकसित भएर आउँदैछ, चीनले प्रभाव बढाउँदैछ भनेर हामी भन्छौँ नि, खासै त्यसबाट हामी आत्तिनुपर्ने विषय चाहिँ छैन होला। हाम्रो छिमेकी देश बढ्नु भनेको, विकसित हुनु भनेको त्यसबाट हामीले लाभ कसरी लिन सक्छौँ भन्ने बहस पनि हुनसक्छ होला। शक्तिशाली राष्ट्रहरूले हामीलाई न्यानो दिन्छन् वा त्यो रातमा हामी डढ्छौँ, चनाको हामी आफै हुनु पर्यो होला। र कुनै पनि देश आफैमा आकारमा सानो हुनसक्छ, अर्थतन्त्रमा सानो हुनसक्छ, तर त्यसको स्वाभिमान र राष्ट्रिय हित कहिले पनि सानो हुँदैन। आयोजना परियोजनाहरूलाई आफ्नो पक्षमा पार्ने अघि राष्ट्रिय हितलाई, राष्ट्रिय समृद्धिलाई मूल केन्द्रमा राखेर हामीले बहस गऱ्यौँ भने सम्भवतः विकास र समृद्धिको बाटो त्यति टाढा छैन। हवस्, यहाँहरू सबैजनालाई समयका लागि धन्यवाद। तपाईँहरूको बाँकी समय शुभ बितोस्। 11:30 चाहिँ टी ब्रेक भनेर उहाँहरूले मलाई सूचना दिनुभएको छ। त्यसमा नेटवर्किङका लागि समय प्रयोग गर्नुहोला। धन्यवाद।
Now we move on to the second part of the morning's program. Firstly, apologies for not mentioning earlier. I would like to inform that we had extended our invitation to dignitaries from the Chinese embassy as well, but due to their COVID protocols, they could not be here with us today. Now, moving ahead, for this session, we have presentations from our delegates from India, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. For the first presentation, I would like to call upon Professor Shrikant Kondapalli. Dr. Shrikant Kondapalli is the Dean of International Studies and Professor in Chinese Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University. He served at the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, New Delhi for nearly 12 years. He completed his Doctor of Philosophy from Chinese Studies Division of School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Dr. Kondapalli, the stage is yours.
A very good afternoon to all of you. Let me thank the organizers for giving me the floor for discussing the China's BRI role in South Asia. We have had a very exciting session in the morning. We knew much about the Nepal's considerations vis-a-vis the Belt and Road Initiative. So I have a few slides I would like to discuss with you on the 8 South Asian countries. Bhutan, there is not much BRI projects. So we skip Bhutan, but nevertheless I have these 7 countries, and I also skip India. If there is any Q&A, I will, because there are no BRI projects in India as well. And as speakers mentioned in the morning, there are 4 problems that India has. One, BRI violates the Indian sovereignty and territorial integrity through the CPEC projects, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor projects passing through Kashmir. Second, which Prime Minister Modi raised in Qingdao summit meeting of the SCO in 2018, and subsequently in every other fora that he attends with the Chinese president. Second is lack of transparency in the BRI projects. No MOUs are public in the BRI projects, so that creates a lot of confusion and, most important, a lot of corruption all across the regions, and so this is an issue. The third is, of course, the financial related problems. Finally, in terms of the environmental fallout. While during the recent climate change meeting, Xi Jinping mentioned about the shutdown of thermal power projects so that there is more greening of the BRI. Nevertheless, there is still a a lot of issues related to environmental fallout. So on those 4 objections, India has not joined the BRI, but nevertheless we joined the AIIB and NDB, National New Development Bank of the BRICS, which partly finances the BRI projects. And AIIB, India is a founding member and the second largest contributor to the AIIB. And some of the AIIB funding goes for the BRI projects. So indirectly it is linked to the BRI projects, but more explicitly opposed to the BRI on the 4 counts that I mentioned. So essentially then we have 6 countries in South Asia which have been part of the BRI. So first let us look at the South Asian region as a whole. So when you look at if BRI is not just an initiative, if it is a strategic idea, as some speakers mentioned in the morning, if it is related to international order, regional order and other things, then we need to first discuss the structural power of South Asia, and predominantly it is United States which is the dominant country in South Asia in terms of levers of power. Someone mentioned about declining United States in the morning. Lee Kuan Yew, the former Singaporean Prime Minister, warned the Chinese that the US is not declining, and they make a mistake if they think that United States is declining. And in fact, on October 7th, the Americans imposed a $150 billion semiconductor ban on China 2 months ago. And Huawei company, ZTE company, all going to go down with this ban on the semiconductors. And the decoupling process is going to be very painful for China, both in finances, technology and markets and globalization aspects. So if we start with the assumption that the United States is declining, we have a problem. Saddam Hussein realized what does that mean, right? So number one, United States is a major structural power within South Asia. India, of course, with large population, territory, resources, economic growth rates. India is the 5th largest economy in the world today, and by 2027 will be the 3rd largest economy. That's a factor that one needs to consider. After US, China, India would be the 3rd largest in about 5 years' time now. Russia is still a big major power center within South Asia, mainly in armaments, now increasingly in energy field, also in other military industrial complexes and manufacturing sectors. European Union, we cannot rule out as a major power in South Asia. Substantial aid that it gives. They also have the sustainable development projects from an environmental perspective and others. Japan, major contributor, very quietly works without making much ruffles. Japan has the quality infrastructure projects. Thereby, Shinzo Abe was trying to say that the BRI is not quality infrastructure. So we have to be careful on the BRI projects if we have to execute some of these. Shinzo Abe enlisted about $100 billion for this, and Japan is quietly working on those infrastructure projects. China obviously is one of the major power centers now, knocking at the gates of South Asian region. But tentatively in Afghanistan, tentatively in Bhutan, more increasingly isolated in Maldives, and also increasingly in Sri Lanka and other places. One of the characteristic feature, as somebody mentioned in the morning, is also the Himalayas as a geographical barrier. To pass through the 8,488 meters peak, you have to have a lot of technologies with you, which are permafrost breaking and operating in minus 40 degrees centigrade. So if Nepal is considering the $56 billion railway line, then it has to consider the technological issues here, which are problematic. China's considerations are obviously on Tibet and Xinjiang. It borders 5 of the 8 South Asian countries. It had settled the territorial disputes with all the South Asian neighbors except with India and Bhutan. But I keep hearing that 13 border posts in Nepal have been removed, and there is a tension now on some of these posts in several places in Nepal-China borders, although it has been resolved in 1961. BRI comes in 3 phases to this region. One is the CPEC, which is the flagship program. Second is the BCIM-EC, Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar Economic Corridor. And thirdly, in terms of the maritime Silk Road that is passing through the Indian Ocean region, Bay of Bengal, Arabian Sea, and others. One consideration for China is on terrorism. When it conducts the BRI projects, it also has a view that it will deploy in future the PAPF, People's Armed Police Force, increasingly to protect the BRI projects. They have not unveiled these things at the moment, but if you have followed what has happened in Birmingham, in Manchester, in other places, they do deploy police forces abroad, and this is going to be an issue that South Asian countries need to consider. Chinese police stations would be manning across to protect the BRI projects in future. In the maritime domain, there is Chinese heavy reliance on the energy imports. China had sent 41 naval contingencies in the pretext of countering Somali piracy operations, but they also conduct a lot of amphibious operations and air defense related subjects. There are also increasingly submarine visits. Submarines are mainly meant for breaking commerce, like the Germans did with the UK during the Second World War. So Chinese submarine visits in 2015 to Colombo and Karachi is a main concern as far as the maritime Silk Road is concerned. Military-wise, to protect the BRI, you also need bases abroad. Potential bases, Djibouti is one which already has been commissioned in 2015. There are potential bases like Hambantota, although Hambantota is a civilian port, but we need to watch out if there are the airports coming up with air bases or logistics facilities in the future. Jimani, Gwadar have also been taken on 30-40 years lease, like the 99-year lease of Hambantota. So these are potential areas that we should not forget. In Tajikistan, there is a mobile base connecting to Badakhan in Afghanistan. So that is an indicator of the... there are also the Chinese Foreign Affairs Work Conference reports, which suggest to protecting China's overseas interests. BRI is an overseas interest today for China, and protection of these would become a main issue in the next decade onwards. For example, China has 36,000 state-owned enterprises, like the agreement Nepal had with PetroChina, with the CNPC and others, or with Gajoba Dam, or with the Great Wall Hydroelectric Development Corporation, which is an SOE, state-owned enterprise. A state-owned enterprise is headed by a Communist Party member, and 100 state-owned enterprises, Communist Party members are directly sent to the Communist Party congresses. The 20th Party Congress was held in October. So it comes with huge party-state backup, the state-owned enterprises. So 36,000 state-owned enterprises are working abroad. Protection of that would be the duty of the PLA and PAPF in the future. People's Armed Police Force, which is their paramilitary force. tourists. Prior to COVID-19, they have 180 million tourists. I hear last year there was some ruckus in Kathmandu about the Chinese tourists. But this is the huge amount of tourists that China can bring about. Protection of these has now become a main problem in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Maghreb, Algeria, and Egypt, Syria, and other places. But essentially, it could also mean any other South Asian country other than Pakistan, Afghanistan in future. So tourist flows will also bring in huge military, paramilitary presence in South Asian region, as with the others. China had exported at $1.74 trillion of FDI so far, and protection again of these investments is going to be a big issue, which China has to address again with the PLA and PAPF. Trade routes, which are going to come up as the 6 main arteries of the BRI have been configured. That is where the deployment patterns will be there. So protecting overseas interests is the main concern here. That would emerge in about a decade's time as many conflicting issues would come up in the BRI implementation. As of now, it is just laying down the roads, railways, energy pipelines, fiber optics, airports and shipyards and others, but increasingly protecting these would be problematic. COVID-19 has, of course, reduced the importance of BRI because of the physical distancing and other border controls, lockdowns and others, including with South Asian countries where we have zero tourism, zero investments, zero almost people-to-people contact and others. In between, in April this year, Xi Jinping addressed the 4-hour forum, which Nepal is a member. In 4-hour forum, Xi Jinping mentioned about the Global Security Initiative and Global Developmental Initiative. Now, China has the habit of surprising many with catchy slogans. So Global Security Initiative is a new concept China has brought in this April, which has a number of elements. Please look at the Chinese ambassador to Ethiopia, his statement in Horn of Africa this June. He was suggesting that he would intervene in internal affairs of Ethiopia, Kenya, and other countries, because that is going to threaten the railway line that has been built up in this with the BRI assistance. So China says it will not interfere in internal affairs of other countries, but this is a new element. Horn of Africa proposal this June is going to be a new element in China's foreign policy. We need to carefully look at this issue more closely. GSI, Global Security Initiative, is a new feature in that aspect, and most important, there is a, you may have all heard about the 36 ancient stratagems of China. I'm not going to recount all those 36, but one I wanted to mention for South Asia. In Chinese, they call He Xiao Kung Ta, which means basically cooperate with the small to counter the big, and they apply that to the South Asian region. They have several other concepts like Yuan Xiao Qin Kung for East Asia, Fan Ka Wei Chu for Central Asia, that is, reverse the role of the host and the guest in Central Asia. That creates a lot of friction with the Russians, as we are seeing in Central Asian region. He Xiao Kung Ta is meant for South Asia, and we see that China implementing cooperate with the small countries in South Asia to counter the big. There's an opportunity for Nepal also in this. You could avail of those aspects. At the multilateral field, we have been increasingly seeing a new initiative. China is proposing a SAARC minus India approach in recent times, and a Himalayan Quad with the foreign ministers of Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka. This has not been really successful, but 4 meetings have already taken place. It's camouflaged at the moment as counter-COVID aspects, but we have to see how it is going to go in future. So China's objectives in South Asia are increasing substantially in this. I want to skip this for the sake of time, but just summarize that there has been a lot of debate within China on the concepts, and this is one where we see a lot of progress. So what is BRI? Those 6.6 corridors that they want to build up, and in 5 connectivities, that is policy coordination. So I hear in the morning that there is a lot of coordination, MOU signed, discussions back and forth. Policy coordination and the policy harmonization that has been removed from the discussions between Nepal and China is also part of that policy coordination, in which there is a lot of shadow boxing that happens between the foreign ministries of China and the South Asian countries. So policy coordination is one important. Second is physical connectivity. Third is the trade. But the entire trade of China with South Asia is just about $140 billion, compared to $4 trillion that China has in terms of trade, imports, exports globally. And with US, EU, Japan, South Korea, ASEAN as the largest trading partner. South Asia is not the largest trading partner. It's just about 1.4% trade that China has with the South Asian countries. Fourth, coordination is in financial integration. I heard in the morning about the renminbi and local currencies exchange. This is a de-dollarization concept. It also has a lot of political elements in it, and one has to be careful about that aspect. Replacing the US dollar as the global currency, that's an effort that Russia, China have been putting forward for long in the recent times. And then people-to-people contacts, basically on tourism and other areas. There are several advantages for China in this regard. Some compared that with the Marshall Plan, although we are not war-ravaged countries in South Asia, except Afghanistan, of course, and to an extent some other countries. But this is one which we could compare with. Chinese official position as far as the white papers that it had issued in 2015, 2018 on the BRI indicates to these aspects. So let me skip those, come to the problems. China said it had invested $120 billion in BRI so far, but the Asian countries require $8 trillion in order to have our modernization completed. The IMF and World Bank are not going to give us this money. ADB is also not going to give these outlays. So we have to actually look for, and China's role there is important, although it has only committed just about $100 billion, according to the official figures from China. These BRI projects are also very turbulent in South Asia. Terrorism or uncertainties, piracy in the Indian Ocean, South China Sea and Bay of Bengal. These are issues. Sovereignty disputes, again, are going to be problematic. And many of these are in the US-led world order and Russian. So the conflict between US and Russia creates a lot of issues for the South Asia indirectly. And China also needs to consider the major powers in the BRI projects. The most critical thing is about the debts, which I heard in the morning. There are 17 countries so far which have fallen into debt. And prominent from South Asia is obviously, to an extent, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, of course, and Maldives. So there are huge lessons here to be learned. In the case of Bangladesh, excuse me, you are the expert, but let me show my ignorance here. $24 billion of agreements signed in 2016, that is equivalent to about 20% of Bangladeshi GDP. Here there is a problem emerging. If Bangladesh is growing at 6 to 7% a year, then it can manage all these debts. But if it is not growing for any reason, and last 1 year because of the COVID and other related problems, there has been a decline across the globe, not just Bangladesh, but across the globe. In fact, China itself is declining, relative decline. World Bank said 2.4% growth rate this year, while Chinese official National Bureau of Statistics mentioned 3.4% growth rate. So from 10% to 6% to 3.4% growth rate. So China would obviously find problem in finding resources for the BRI. 2 summit meetings have been held. The third meeting, only 26 foreign ministers were attending. And within this, Lavrov did not attend. He was there physically, but somebody read his speech. So Russians are murmuring about the BRI. And during the Bali summit in G20 a few weeks ago, Xi Jinping mentioned to a press reporter that there will be a third summit meeting somewhere next year. So probably a mid-course correction would be made of all the problems that we have seen. Pakistan has a debt ratio of 86%. And so this is, and it is going for the IMF loans packages on that regard. So that is, in terms of Sri Lanka, the Chinese debt is about 10%, but actually it is about 24%. Some suggest to 24% so there is the debt issue that needs to be addressed. And I like what Pompeo told the Nepalese foreign minister, the Secretary of State of the US. If you need this project, if you're desperate for this project, if you actually need this for your economic development, go ahead with that project. If you have a flashy project, capital intensive project like Hambantota or Colombo Port project, these are not going to bring in returns for you, economic returns. So there is a concern here in terms of what we do with our debts in South Asia. Advantages for China in the BRI, many advantages. The CSIS, the Washington-based think tank, suggested that nearly 90% of the contracts go to the SOEs in China. None of our companies function in the BRI projects. There is a lot of course, the Chinese companies spread. I mentioned about those 36,000 SOEs of China in the. China is also using excessive capacities in the BRI construction. 2 years ago, prior to the COVID, China produced about 820 million tons of steel. That's about 50% of global production. China produced 24,000 metric tons of cement. That's about 54% of global cement. And BRI is about steel, cement, glass, whatever, all those for the infrastructure projects. So that is where China is now extensively using these excess capacities for, also in terms of technical talent. China produces 10 million graduates a year, and they could find jobs only for 4 million. So we're going to see 6 million of these offloaded in the BRI projects. All these graduates will be running all around in the BRI, which is good in a way, because this is young talent, but we also have to find jobs for our roles, for our kids. So that is where the issue of competition comes up. I mentioned about the PLA, and 19 Communist Party Congress mentioned the Chinese military would be made a world-class military by 2049. A world-class military means from Kathmandu to Antarctica, you have to transport troops within 6 hours. From Kathmandu to Haiti, you have to transport troops in 6 hours' time. So that is what the Chinese are going to do in the interregnum and become a continental and maritime power. So in relation to South Asia, we actually see China's investments have been very minimal in the South Asian region. These are coming in different formats, loans, aid, and others, but FDI as such is very little. Although American Enterprise Institute has suggested they have been investing hugely in the South Asian region, but this appears to be an exaggeration. Since my time is going to be up, I quickly skip some of these, focus on the country specific. So China-Pakistan, AEI suggests $66 billion investment for the past 2005 to 22, mainly in the construction jobs, construction work, about $50 billion. Trade is increasing, but still marginal, $27 billion still last year. FTA signed, but Pakistan is crib about this because of the dumping of goods. And there is some lesson for Nepal on this. So CPEC is the flagship program according to Li Keqiang, and CPEC projects have resulted in huge investments in the infrastructure, including in Gwadar port, in Huawei 5G networks and telecom and energy projects, hydroelectricity projects and others. But the issue for Pakistan is also loss in revenues. 6 to 8 billion in tax revenues lost due to the heavy dependence on China in the CPEC projects. Also, 20% of CPEC is debt-based finance. 80% of investment to generate 40,000 jobs for Pakistanis, but 80,000 jobs for the Chinese, according to the Chinese ambassador's statement in Islamabad. So assessment here for the Pakistan, as far as the BRI is concerned, is that the GDP is actually declining in the last few years, and China's returns would also decline. This is an issue which means that there are potential Hammantotas in Pakistan, that is Gwadar, Jimani, or other areas. And somebody mentioned Chinese loans are coming at 4%. In Pakistan, it comes at 5%. Hanoi Metro came at 5% interest rate. The second phase of Hanoi, Vietnam Metro came at 5%. So the interest rates are pretty high as compared to the global. If you go for Dubai holdings, Singapore holdings, or ADB loans, these come at very low. And India contracted a very, very low interest rate with Japan for a high-speed railway between Ahmedabad to Mumbai at 0.002 to be repaid in 52 years. So we pay nothing to Japan in this process. Delhi Metro is constructed by the Japanese loans and at very concessional rates. So you see there a huge difference between Chinese and the other. Actually, several projects have been cancelled because of terrorism or other related issues. Okay, quickly, China, Nepal, you have more knowledge about it, so I will skip here, except to state that the focus is again on connectivity, infrastructure, energy projects, but Buddh Gandak project has also resulted in the Nepalese Senate criticizing the corruption-related problems in domestic politics of Nepal. Investments in these sectors, $3.48 billion between 2005 to 2022 this year, mainly in energy and transportation networks. So again, let me skip. Nepal suffered because of the COVID border control procedures and many other factors. Sri Lanka, $13.94 billion in the past 2005 to 2022, transportation sector received 5.6 billion, and the loans constitute about 10% of Sri Lanka's debt. Some suggest to about 24% the actual figures. Infrastructure projects are mentioned here in this slide, and also the FTA that is being discussed still. China Maldives $1.23 billion investment. Well, when you compare with the Maldives GDP of $9 billion, this is quite a huge investment coming in, and the constraints that it may pose in future. These are some projects that they have conducted in Maldives, but former President Nasheed mentioned that China is involved in island grab in Maldives, and there is a huge concern in regard to the BRI projects in Maldives. China, Bangladesh, much of that is again in the connectivity related. $30 billion investment between 2005 to 22, energy, transportation sectors. But huge trade imbalance between Bangladesh and China. $24 billion is the overall trade, and 24 is the Chinese exports to Dhaka. These are some projects that have been conducted so far in the China-Afghanistan. China has been relatively silent on Afghanistan. $154 million investment so far, actual investment. Despite all the calls about the Istanbul process, the various other initiatives that have been conducted. There is a promise of investment, but this has actually not happened. You may have seen those WhatsApp clippings 2 weeks ago about people jumping from the rooftops when the ISIS attacked a Chinese building, Chinese constructed building in Kabul, a guest house, and so there is a huge problem about terrorism in Afghanistan. Also about no fresh water and no electricity transportation networks. That constrains China's investment in the BRI in Afghanistan. Global responses to the BRI, let me skip because some of these were mentioned. Some observations here. One moment, I will wind up. China triggered the current crisis in Sri Lanka substantially. Wang Yi went to Sri Lanka in March, and one of the main points is to insist that the fertilizers that Sri Lanka imported from Qingdao, that needs to be paid back. He has been insisting on this because the Rajapaksa government announced a organic fertilizer policy, and they were importing only organic fertilizers, and that created tension in terms of food production, also in terms of imports, which is a marginal factor, but the most important aspect is Sri Lanka has to pay for all the rejected fertilizers. The ship went back and it has to be, all the expenses have to be paid by Sri Lanka. So far, there is not much progress in terms of the IMF bailout packages and the financial meltdown in Sri Lanka on this. In Pakistan, the current crisis is partly related to China, not fully related to China. It is, of course, the local domestic factors, terrorism and various others. But this is one where we need to really discuss on what happens if BRI projects are increased in South Asia. China's focus is not on economic returns. China's focus is on political returns, military returns, strategic returns. It's not about how much they're going to get in terms of the BRI projects. So that one needs to keep in mind, and that is where Sri Lanka and Pakistan. I spent a week in Hambantota port, and I saw only one ship landing, and all of that stuff was going into the Sri Lankan domestic market. And much of this is Indian merchandise, by the way, that those ships were carrying. And so it is a huge white elephant that was created. And reports of bribery, reports of so many other things mentioned in Sri Lankan press. So these are some issues that we need to. And finally, the assessment. There are beneficiaries and losers in BRI. Any economic project, any strategic project will have those losers and gainers. One of the benefits is, of course, the infrastructure projects, various infrastructure projects. Tomorrow or day after, or 10 years down the line, they start yielding economic returns once in a while. So we should expect something. So Pakistan should be expecting some benefits. Laos, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Myanmar, Nepal, Central Asian republics, Italy, Greece, and Kenya. In Kenya, when they were not able to pay back, the foreign ministry spokeswoman, Hua Chunying, said, we will go and grab the project. We will conduct the project of manning the railway between the African coast. So that is a prospect that we also have to keep in mind. 14% of the 1600 BRI projects currently are running into problems, mainly debt related, but also other problems like environmental issues and others. The role of China's SOEs are very important here that we need to be looking at more carefully. Losers are with debt, opaqueness, and environmental issues. If you have any arbitration of BRI projects, it has to be settled in a Chinese court, not in a Nepalese court in future. So be prepared for grooming lawyers in China rather than in Nepal. These arbitration procedures are going to be very complicated in future if you have any project problem. Risk and sustainability. Liu Ruofu, the Exim Bank former president, ex-president, said the average liability and debt ratios is the Chinese who was handling. China disburses these loans through CDB, Exim Bank, and CNBC. So Exim Bank president was saying, former president is saying, the liability and debt ratios have reached 35 and 126% compared to the global. If you take a loan from IMF or World Bank, it comes at around 20% and 100%, but the Chinese come at 35 and 126%. So that's where we need to keep a watch on. Thank you.
With a professional background in investment banking, he has wide experience in both public and private sectors. Mr. Paris has, among other roles, served as presidential spokesman, chairman of Sri Lanka's national broadcaster Rupavahini Corporation, chairman and director general of Resettlement, and most recently as advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. A columnist and commentator in mainstream print, electronic and online media, Mr. Paris is currently engaged in empowering rural communities affected by both COVID-19 pandemic and Sri Lanka's recent economic collapse. Mr. Harim Watson Paris.
Inviting me to this important session, time, and I will be asked to be quite brief in presenting the Sri Lankan experience with BRI. And I'll try to just highlight some issues that we can discuss further during the panel discussion that we have after lunch. And firstly, in looking at Sri Lanka's experience, we need to see the current context that Sri Lanka finds itself in, particularly as we've been having the discussion with the terminology of debt trap. And if there is a debt trap, then Sri Lanka has fallen into it. In May of this year, Sri Lanka suspended the repayment of any and all of its foreign debt obligations. So Sri Lanka is effectively bankrupt. It does not honor its international obligations anymore, either in interest payments or in capital payments. So if you are by some chance holders of Sri Lanka sovereign bonds, any other kind of lending, including debts by sovereign Chinese entities, the World Bank, ADB, nobody is getting paid. So that's the situation that Sri Lanka finds itself in. And for the specific focus of BRI, I think some of these issues were in Sri Lanka, some of these were covered by Professor Srikant's excellent and informative presentation before me. one of the issues has to be how much of Sri Lanka's outstanding debt belongs, as it were, to China. Now, firstly, it has been hard for Sri Lanka and for Sri Lanka's lenders to get an immediate grip on exactly how much Sri Lanka's loans are, and as much as you think this might be an easy thing, this has to do with the fact that there is a considerable amount of foreign currency and foreign debt that is borne by state-owned enterprises, mainly the state utilities, the electricity board, the road development authority, the ports authority, and the national airline, among other smaller entities that carry this debt, and therefore it is both sort of government official debt plus the debt of all of these entities, which are 100% government owned, and very often, most of the time, have been received with sovereign guarantees. And so Sri Lanka's debt estimates can be anything from 35 to 45 billion, and then the estimate of the Chinese component of that perhaps between 10 to 20%. If one takes the loan stock at $35 billion, Chinese component would be about 7, maybe 20% of that. There are 4 points that I would like to very quickly just highlight for you, which we can discuss further during our panel discussion, which I think is relevant to Sri Lanka's experience. Sri Lanka's experience is probably one that the rest of South Asia would want to try to avoid. We see worrying signs of Pakistan going down the same track. The first has been the feasibility and the economic viability of projects. Until China became an active lender in international markets, when it came to the issue of funding projects, large, medium scale or small, generally from multilateral lenders for the larger projects, the World Bank, the ADB, and so on, or bilaterally for smaller cases, the project viability, the environmental impact were important considerations that were made in the financing plan. And there was considerable time, effort, even costs and expenses incurred to ensure that you had a proper environmental impact assessment, that the economic feasibility of the project, the economic returns of the project, and particularly that the financing plan itself, including the debt or the leverage component, was in fact sustainable through that project. One of the things that has become very clear, at least with Sri Lanka's experience with BRI, and I wouldn't extrapolate this necessarily into the region, I will leave that for people more suitable than myself, but with Sri Lanka, it has been very clear that the economic viability of these projects were absolutely not taken into consideration, or they were taken into consideration with such a gung-ho attitude that very clearly the common term that is used, white elephant, is actually in fact correct. There is a lot of interest with regard to the Hambantota port around the world, not simply because of what transpired. And Professor Srikant's sort of experiential experience, I stay there for 1 week and I see one ship, is roughly correct of what the situation is. So clearly you invest in a port when there was a need, or when the obvious argument was that you develop the Colombo port much more. There is significant investment into the Colombo port that was missing, and you have transshipment business anyway there, and this is what you probably want to do, and instead you actually go and do a new port in the middle of nowhere. It was, of course, the former president's constituency. He probably had political and personal reasons for wanting it there. But for the first time, you had somebody who would just come and throw money at that without actually an examination of any of these factors, and either environmental or economic. And the prime responsibility, obviously, for this needs to go to domestic government, so I would not stand here as a Sri Lankan from Sri Lanka and periodically serving in Sri Lankan governments to say that the Sri Lankan government is exempt from this. In fact, I would say they should hold predominant responsibility for absolutely unjustifiable actions on their behalf, and it's actually a failure of Sri Lanka's policy making and democratic institutions that strong executives have been allowed to get away with this kind of action. However, the issue is what is the role that the lender has. General international best practice has been that lenders carry large responsibility for funding projects. If I would use just a casual example, it is like, what is the responsibility that a bartender takes for continuing to serve drinks to a drunk customer? How liable is he in law if the drunk customer was to then go and have a drunk driving accident? I mean, obviously the intoxicated person is primarily responsible, like the Sri Lankan government is, but I think in law it's been established that the bartender also carries significant liability. The second point that I would get to is the concessionality of these loans. There have been discussions, and again in the prior presentation there was, about the interest rates that has been there. The global experience on concessionary, on lending for infrastructure to developing nations or to the global south and including to South Asia and particularly Sri Lanka has been largely that of Japan, ADB and so forth, where you have the long-term loans, where you have the extremely low interest rates and grace periods and so forth. The Chinese experience, or the experience of the BRI funding, was a complete reversal of the textbook case for this. Whereas countries such as in South Asia, and certainly for Sri Lanka, and I will keep a Sri Lankan focus, we needed to attract foreign direct investment, FDI. Instead, China is actually not an investor in Sri Lanka. In fact, they have barely invested. They have been a lender in Sri Lanka. You really don't have Chinese firms, state-owned or otherwise, that have actually come and invested, as in taking equity positions or so on, but they have instead been lenders. And so they're not investors in Sri Lanka, they are lenders. And this lending has been the kindest thing that one could say, and since my previous experience in as a Sri Lankan diplomat, I would say it has been non-concessionary. Let's put it that way. Take the particular loan that was given for the port. You would not really want to fund ports in this way. 15-year loan, non-concessionary, and at about 6.5% in US dollar terms. This is not what you would generally go for. I mean, your average US bond even at that time would be about half this. So you don't really move into large-scale infrastructure at loans that are at, shall we say, a premium to the market, let alone at a discount to the market. The other factor, of course, that's not only the interest rate, is the tough conditionalities that come with these loan covenants. It insists that you actually source all your services, or the contract goes to a Chinese contractor. And so Sri Lanka's experience of that, and I will be very brief, is that the Chinese contracting costs have been at about 1/3 higher to 50% higher, and sometimes even higher than 50% higher to global norms for contraction of such services. So for instance, where there has been a bit of highway that has been built by Chinese constructors, if one is able to take the total cost, and per kilometer Sri Lanka has some of the most expensive highways in the world today. And this is because the cost comes not only with the interest rate, but the cost comes by being locked into a supplier who is then allowed to jack up the price and basically just add to the project cost. Part of the political leverage that comes into it, it's fairly astronomical but worth stating for a situation such as this, and would be interesting discussion at our panel discussion, is that at the time that Sri Lanka was guzzling Chinese debt at 6, 7, 8%, it actually turned down $500 million or $500 million of a grant from the Millennium Challenge Corporation. And so this was part of the research and writings that I did. I said, you have to be a particularly kind of lunatic to actually turn down $500 million in free money to go after a couple of billion of very expensive money. Now, the opposition to taking to the MCC compact did come from political parties and trade unions that were closely allied and possibly very well funded by the Communist Party or by various entities in China. The other issue that is particularly relevant to Sri Lanka, given that we are now bankrupt and not paying our international loans, has been the renegotiation of all our debts, obviously, including that of China. Until several days, perhaps a week ago, part of the problem was, to put it prettily, China was not coming to the party. There was repeated attempts to have a Sri Lanka debtor forum, and these were to be organized, facilitated by the IMF, and that didn't work multilaterally. Actually, firstly by Japan as a lead debtor, by the Paris Club, and the Chinese took the position, no, we will negotiate this bilaterally, not multilaterally. Then said, no, this is not government, we will say the specific institutions will have to do their own negotiations, and on principle we refuse to take what's commonly referred to as a haircut for your debts. This has obviously not only been unhelpful in terms of actually renegotiation, but it has meant that the process has not really started. So really Sri Lanka is a bit at a standstill. And the geopolitical and the political implications of this I'll probably leave to our discussion, not least because my time is up. I would merely say that one of the things that is interesting to note is that Chinese involvement in policy or politics is taking a shift, obviously. We have seen the regional involvement, the political engagement, and this is different from what Chinese policy and politics were maybe a decade or two ago. Sri Lanka had a long-running civil war. There were many countries that were facilitating even the peace process during that time. China was not involved, but right now one sees a very active Chinese footprint in domestic politics, supporting candidates, funding elites, funding politics, and not necessarily in the most transparent manner. And generally a lot of both the political activities and in fact economic activities as well as been mentioned, these MOUs are hard to find, even in parliament they're not tabled. And so the opacity of all of this is significant cause for concern. I would merely say Sri Lanka has to benefit by the growing economy of China as well as India, and needs to position itself to do that. Unfortunately, I would take the blame on Sri Lankan governing elites that have failed to do so, and today Sri Lanka is in an unenviable position from which you need to find a way back. Thank you.
Dr. Taufiqul Islam Khan is an economist and currently a senior research fellow at the Center for Policy Dialogue, CPD, Bangladesh. Dr. Khan is a member of the SDG working team constituted under the Prime Minister's Office, Government of Bangladesh. He is also a member of the SDG's NGO subcommittee constituted under the NGO Affairs Bureau of Bangladesh. Dr. Khan was also a member of the technical committee set up by Bangladesh government agencies, including the Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics, External Relations Division, and Ministry of Commerce. Dr. Khan has received the Australian Leadership Award in 2008. Dr. Taufiqul Islam Khan.
Thank you very much. I think, according to the schedule, we should have been eating lunch by now. So I'll try to be brief. I don't have a presentation that has an advantage. And we will also have some opportunity to speak post-lunch session, so I will probably cover some of the issues. So Unlike my seniors who speak from South Asia and Sri Lankan perspective, I cannot be that comprehensive. But let me start by saying that China, in the South Asian context, be it India or be it other economies, is the elephant in the room. So whenever we speak our economic development and others, China will be always there in the discussion in the room. I am an economist. I am not a security or strategic person, not from the international relations, so my interventions will be more from the economic justification. And as a disclaimer, the center I work for, Center for Policy Dialogue, one of the leading think tanks in Bangladesh, and Professor Eman Sohan, when he founded it, one of his vision was to have an integrated regional cooperation in South Asia and also with China. So we work independently from the track 2 perspective for South Asia, and also we are one of the initiators of BCIM, and we feel proud that Bangladesh, China, India, and Myanmar, the initiative successfully went from track 2 to track 1. And one of the aspirations we had is to rediscover the lost Silk Route that could mean to Kolkata project that we wanted to have. And in 2013, the 11th BCIM forum, we organized it in Dhaka, had the first car rally starting from Kolkata to through Bangladesh, Myanmar, and then Kunming. So we thought there is a great potential in the system. This is about the time when the BRI came into its full form, and after that we have seen a couple of state visits were very significant from the Bangladesh perspective. In 2014, our Prime Minister, PM Hasina, she went to China, and in 2016, President Xi also visited. And if we look into the commitments made by the two top leaders, President Xi said that we agreed to elevate China-Bangladesh ties from comprehensive partnership of cooperation to a strategic partnership. PM Hasina, on the other hand, said Bangladesh is willing to actively work with China within the framework of the BRI and support building of an economic corridor linking BCIM. So you can understand the interest of the two countries and where it lies. In fact, China was always very important from Bangladesh perspective, particularly from the trade perspective. China is the leading bilateral trade partner for Bangladesh. So, but it is highly skewed towards Chinese export and Bangladesh's import compared to the other way around. We export only $1 billion last year, and it's increasing. Of course, I have to recognize that. But we, at the same time, we import approximately $40 billion, despite the fact that China provides 99%, DFQ export 99% of the all products. So it's quite there. But since 2016, as Professor Srikant said, that there are significant commitments made. The commitments made was approximately $40 billion, $24.5 billion in bilateral assistance for infrastructure, $13.6 billion in joint venture, $20 billion in loan agreement. Not all of them came into scene, but in 2016, China signed 8 projects that is worth $19.45 billion, including the a Podda Bridge Rail project for 3.3 billion, coal power plant in Paira 1.9 billion, digital connectivity 1 billion, and the power grid strengthening project $1.3 billion. In fact, at this moment, Bangladesh is the second highest receiver of Chinese assistance or investment or ODA or loans in South Asia after Pakistan. We are also the second largest economy after India in South Asia, so you can understand the scale is much higher compared to Maldives and Sri Lanka, perhaps Nepal as well, so that will happen there. Now, let me conclude, or let me go into the main stake after all this data and statistics. What are the issues we have? One of the issues is that this investment, not necessarily direct investment, what we call the FDI. FDI from China is not that much. We have it is about 12% of our total FDI stock. Are mainly going to clothing and apparel. We are the second largest R&D exporters in the world, so China is the first. So we have that. The second one is the power. So overall Chinese assistance generally goes into the infrastructure, the transportation, and then followed by power, particularly coal power, coal-fired power. So that is there. So what are the concerns? You have spoken about Chinese loans are a bit expensive. Bangladesh generally takes loans from IDA, and IDA is the World Bank's window for soft loan, and ADB. So 60% of our total loans are from there at this moment of the total debt servicing that we have. Usually it is less than 1% of the with interest. Chinese loans are generally 2%, and 2% they have service charges, so those are there. The grace period is shorter, of course, generally on an average 5 years, and the repayment period is also shorter, on an average 15 years, and that is also very significant. At this moment, I think not at this moment, as of June 2021, that is our fiscal year, July to June. We have approximately $4 billion debt outstanding figure with China. This 50% of it can be called ODA, 50% are supplier's credit or buyer's credit. In past, China usually provided us with high-term loans, which buyer's credit or Chinese credit. This is highest. This is bilaterally one of the highest in a sense. After Japan provides about, this is 8% of our total debt, overseas debt. Japan we have 18%, but Japan has a long history of providing very significant assistance to us. So those are the concerns, but what are the general challenges we have? The general challenges we have is, one is external debt, you have talked about it. There is also a concern about environment, not only that the general idea of the finance a coal-fired project, but in general the environmental assessments are in question worldwide, and there are also I think a question of good governance and costing of these projects. So feasibility studies, technical studies are very key or essential parts of the whole debate. But what we did not discuss a lot in this room from this morning, and I'm happy that I can add a new element to the discussion, otherwise we know this, all these things, is that generally Chinese ODA or assistance are tied. And we, from Bangladesh, Nepal and others, low-income countries, lower middle-income countries, have fought a long way to untie aid. I've been to GPDC, Development Cooperation Summit. OECD DAC is working towards untying aid. And this was a great debate during the 70s, 80s, and 90s, that how can we untie foreign aid? And the 2005 Paris Declaration made a significant step towards that process. But for China, it is mostly tying aid. So over the last 1 decade or half, the tied aid, the concept of tied aid, has come back as well. So even if you have an expensive loan, but if you can give or provide the contract in a competitive manner, then it is much easier to have a more financial viability. But in general, and I will speak about it in probably the following session, I will conclude for the brevity of time, is that I can identify the 6 viabilities that we need to consider when we talk about BRI and such loans. And China is not the only one. India is providing a lot of assistance. So for South Asia, as a recipient countries, Nepal, Bangladesh, probably Sri Lanka and others, these issues will come very strongly. And this is an element that we are also discussing a lot of South-South cooperation. So BRI falls under that larger umbrella. So the first viability that we will talk about is technical or technological viability. Nepal's example through the Himalayan border is an example, so you can understand it has to be technically viable. Sometimes they move forward with this project and it may not be technically viable by a large extent. It has to be definitely financially viable, so we have to provide, to give them back the loan, so we have to return them. Bangladesh has never defaulted in 50 years of its history, and we are very proud of it. The concern is that when we talk about financial viability, I'm also mentioning the third one, the economic viability, and I will explain, give you a little bit of a hint of my thinking behind it. When you think about a project that has a much shorter grace period and the repayment period with the loan interest, you also have to think that this is something we have to pay back with dollars or foreign currencies. So there are 2 issues to be considered. One, the infrastructure should provide enough opportunity of economic activity so that we can actually generate government revenue and have the government will have the ability to pay back the loan. This is number one. The second thing, that it should create enough opportunity to generate foreign exchange so that we can pay back with foreign exchange. So there is a dual there is a challenge of dual mismatch, and this is exactly what happened in Asian financial crisis. Some of the projects can be viable, but we may not have enough foreign exchange to return. And when you have, say, 4%, 5%, oh, 2 more minutes, so I have enough. So when we have, when we are talking about 4%, 5%, think about when we are going to pay them back, how much our foreign currency will depreciate. Bangladesh, giving an example, we are celebrating a decade-long high growth. So our debt GDP ratio is often the indicator that we discuss in this context, can be very small. We had a very stable exchange rate as well, so our per capita income grew in dollar terms. But in last 1 year, $1 BDT exchange rate came down from 85, 86 to 107, 8 now at this moment. So about 20% depreciation of Thapa happened in 1 year. So exactly your exchange, our interest rate will naturally increase very substantially. We often do not consider it when we talk about this interest rate in dollar terms, because
when we talk about financing this project, these projects can be very important, but also we have to consider other alternatives. The ODA coming from traditional sources are limiting, but we have higher aspiration, not only from the political point of view, but also from the economic point of view, perhaps. But we have to think about the alternatives in a way that we need to find a source. If the traditional loan providers are not providing us enough opportunity, we can generate the resources from the domestic borrowing through banks and non-banks. So we have those sources. But why do we consider loans from foreign sources? Because of this foreign exchange constraint we have in these infrastructure projects. I will quickly go through I will talk about the environmental viability. We often do not talk about social viability as well. How these projects are going to affect the local communities and the residents. So there is a great need for land acquisition, and that we need to talk about those things as well. Finally, the political viability is the other elephant in the room from our domestic concerns as well. So the final line that has been said by many speakers before, that it is to a large extent, it is also a responsibility on our part, the onus is with the recipient countries, that we consider these viabilities and take our decisions accordingly. Hope to meet you after the lunch. Thank you very much.
Has been awarded PhD in Political Science by the University of Hyderabad, India, for his thesis entitled Domestic Politics and International Order, a Constructive Analysis of Chinese Discourse on Territorial Sovereignty, on October 2022. He has done his master's degree in Political Science from the University of Hyderabad. Furthermore, he has also learned Chinese language at the English and Foreign Language University, Hyderabad, India, and Tsinghua University, Beijing, exploring the linkages between domestic realms and Chinese foreign and security policies, the political legitimacy of the CPC, India-China relations, and China's approaches to international order are his research interests. Dr. Devendra Kumar.
Good afternoon to everyone, and first of all, let me thank Ambassador Karna for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. Now, given that there is less time and the canvas of the topic that I'm going to talk about is really vast, that is India-China relations in the contemporary context. So what I'll do is that I'll talk about broad issues, and will obviously my previous co-panelists have talked about many of the issues in great detail, so it will help me to just contextualize with broad points. So first I'll just briefly discuss about the current state of India-China relations, and then contextualize it within the regional dynamics, and then I'll briefly talk about whether anything can be done by South Asian countries as a collective to deal with negative impacts of India-China relations. Now, the current state of India-China relationship is at such a stage where we do not know what shapes it will take. Now, as of today, the consensus built since the late 1980s and early 1990s stands broken. This consensus was based on a series of agreements signed between both sides to manage situation on the border through confidence building measures, consultation mechanisms both at military and diplomatic levels, information sharing, and limits on the deployment of military exercises and infrastructure, so on and so forth. This allowed both sides to deepen their cooperation in economic levels, in international institutions, and people-to-people contacts. Now, in short, it meant that while both sides maintained peace at the border by managing face-offs on the border under agreements and protocols signed, their economic relations deepened. As a consequence, we have trade between India and China, which have crossed 100 billion USD last year, although there are questions about huge trade deficits and the questions of access to market for Indian companies in China, etc. Now this consensus, when it stands broken and we do not see any positive sign as of now, whether and how both sides can rebuild the same. Now, the ongoing tension at the border, however, gives us a little bit context, and I'll talk about the patterns and timings of Chinese incursions on the border or line of actual control. There have been some useful studies on the data and the patterns of the way Chinese PLA behaves on the border. The year 2005 is taken as a crucial, inflection point. From there onwards, we see that the number of incursions have been increasing till now. And 2005 is important for three reasons. One is that it was also the year when India-China relations were at the peak. Right? They signed a protocol on political parameters for resolving boundary. Another factor is that 2005 is the year when India and US started strengthening their defense and energy ties. And there is something correlated with the pattern of incursion that happen on the border. Now, both official data and independent studies document that the number of incursions have gone up steadily since 2005. At the same time, we have seen that increasingly the time taken to resolve face-offs on the border has increased. So we have the Depsang standoff in April 2000 took 21 days, which was actually a decisive moment, and it was followed by a sharp increase in incursions as well as a sequence of standoffs and skirmishes. For example, in Chumar it took 16 days in 2014. In Burtse in 2015 it took 5 days. Doklam it took 73 days to resolve the standoff, and now we have ongoing standoff in Galwan since April 2020. Now this pattern of Chinese incursions on the border tells two things about India-China relations. One is that the existing agreements and protocols are not working out. Second is that the border tensions are not just reflections of the differences or in perceptions where the LAC lies and the issues of technicalities. On the other hand, they reflect the larger regional security and strategic dynamics, which I will talk about in a while. Now, despite the border tensions, the India-China economic relations are still strong. As I said, the bilateral trade has crossed 100 million USD in last year, and but there have been some actions by India which reflects both India's inability or I'll say unwillingness to decouple economically while it waits for Chinese reactions on the border. Now, to contextualize, since previous speakers have talked a lot in great detail about economic security and even military context in the context of BRI and South Asia, I'll try to make sense of regional dynamics and strategic factors at the regional level by laying out three components of China's regional strategy. Now, the first component is economic integration of neighborhood, which is basically allow China to develop greater economic interdependence among each other, but particularly it helps China to build because the interdependence is in favor of China because China is more economically powerful, and it has been talked about in great detail, so I'll just skip it. Second, while China pursues bilateral relations, the use of multilateral institutions at the regional level has become very important. So you have, and we can see, we can see a pattern in China's participation in regional multilateral institutions, whether it is Southeast Asia, ASEAN plus 3, ASEAN Regional Forum, APEC or HCU, or China's attempt to be part of SHARC or OIC, Organization of Islamic Countries. Now, the third component of the China's regional strategy that I'm talking about is the use of or relying on certain normative narratives, which starts from the narrative of peaceful rise of China, then we had developmental peace, then community of shared interest, and then we talked about, Professor Kondapalli talked about global security initiative, and there's another initiative or a narrative which is being developed is the global development initiative. Now these narratives are at present China's role in the at global level and in regions in its neighborhood as beneficial and win-win situation for China and these countries. But essentially these narratives are used to legitimize its role in different areas. Now, China's regional strategy is aimed at achieving three main objectives, which is useful to understand how China's regional strategy impacts India-China relation, and then in turn India and India's relations with South Asian countries. Now, these three objectives are domestic security and economic stability. Obviously, China depends on the conducive and regional environment for its own economic development, and domestic security, especially in Tibet, Xinjiang, and other regions. The second objective is regional economic dominance, and it is particularly useful when we look at the way China has used economic interdependencies in favor of China as a weapon to pressurize certain countries. We have China's imposition on ban on Japan with respect to Senkaku Islands, then China's actions in economic terms in terms with respect to THAAD missile system in South Korea, and then we saw during the COVID period against Australia. And the third, obviously, which is very important, dimension or objective of China's regional strategy, which is to prevent major powers from having military alliances with or presence in neighboring countries. And we have seen all these three objectives and three dimensions of China's regional strategy from the very beginning of the founding of PRC. Although these different objectives and dimensions have been, prominent in one period, then and another dimension in another period. So we have seen that China opposed Soviet presence in Vietnam. Soviet military presence in Vietnam and American presence in Vietnam, then in Inner Mongolia and on its border. And also we see that how China reacts to US presence in Afghanistan. And although in the post-Cold War period, the economic dimension has become much more salient, which was not the case in the pre-reform period. Now, how does this regional strategy impact India-China relations and in turn India's relation with South Asian countries? Now, China's objective is to project itself as the superpower at par with US. Also, in this regional strategy, India's role as an aspiring power is played down. We can discern such tendencies frequently in Chinese discourses, and we have seen in the previous presentations how China tries to underplay India's role. Now, So, now in Chinese eyes, obviously China-Pakistan relations and especially the security of CESIF project and India's intention is an issue. Then Tibet and Dalai Lama issue. Then India's attempt to build a stronger ties with countries in East and Southeast Asia like Japan, South Korea, Vietnam under the broader now framework of Indo-Pacific. And India's relations with the US, specifically in security and defense sectors, is particularly the reason why, that's a factor in the way China behaves on the LAC. Then related to this, we have already had seen that China's actions in Indian Ocean, which I will not talk about in detail. But now I'll just mention last issue is that China's geo-economic project obviously are an issue for India, and we have Professor Kondapalli outlined 4 issues. Apart from that, I'll say that the issue is not so much about Chinese economic projects. It is about the security implications of these projects. And one issue that India has objected as far as BRI is concerned is the transparency and inclusive governance and governance structures and rules. Now let us consider India's response to AIIB. Why India joined AIIB? In previous writing, I have argued that India joined AIIB because it is a relatively inclusive, transparent institution, so that it helps India to discern China's strategic intentions. Because from the very beginning of proposal of a project to its end, India or all members know where the money is going, how project is implemented, or who are the actors, on what basis project is awarded. So this issue, I won't quote, this is long quote by the Indian Foreign Ministry in 2017 when they outlined this issue that, the issue of social and environmental impact assessment and financial mechanism under the BRI projects. And another development which has not been talked about, I briefly talk about the presence of Chinese security companies in South Asian countries. As of now, I have a paper which is coming in a journal. I have profiled 12 Chinese private security companies in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Myanmar and Sri Lanka. And this is an issue which has wider implications because it will change the nature of China's engagement with South Asia. And if we connect it with the BRI and China's strategic intentions, it becomes clear that the presence of or increasing presence of private security companies is will create problems for because these companies will involve themselves in local politics. They are also being some of these companies are also cooperating with the Pakistani Navy or other local security companies. So this is a big issue that I would highlight that we should have a larger discussion. And now, so this is the broad picture of India-China relations and regional context. So is there a way out of this impasse? So as far as the geo-economic or economic projects are concerned, I'll just briefly highlight it one point as a point of discussion rather than my own argument in this. What can South Asian countries do about this? So one way is that China learns lessons from the BRI implementation till now, and it brings in transparency and other governance structures and rules, which is not possible so far. We see that this is not going to happen. So my submission is for discussion, as a point of discussion, is that what South Asian countries can do. Is there a possibility that SARC can become a platform for such an initiative, or such a platform where these countries come together as a collective and discuss? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now it's time for our lunch. I would request all the guests to please move to the restaurant area for the lunch, and we will gather again here after lunch, and we'll have 2 panel discussions after the lunch. Thank you very much.